Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome to the 30th A-State Agribusiness Conference. This is an annual event that began in 1995. I'm Bert Greenwalt, Professor of Agricultural Economics here at the university, and I'm your moderator today. This conference, as I said, was founded in 95 with the goal of providing agricultural commodity producers, our farmers, our agribusiness professionals, and our students here at the university information about the economic and policy issues which are impacting agriculture. Today's program continues that tradition, and we have a lineup of expert speakers who are here to share their views and experience to describe the current political and economic environment. Their biographies are in the printed brochure, and I would encourage you to take a look at those. Our first speaker with a welcome and news from the A-State College of Agriculture is my colleague, Dr. Mickey LaTour, Dean of the College, and without further ado, Dean LaTour. Thank you for coming today. Dean LaTour.
Thank you, Bert. I also want to make sure that everyone recognizes that this is the 30th year for this. So let's give Bert a round of applause for 30 years of this conference and excellence to Arkansas State University in Jonesboro. So I'd like to give you an update about the College of Agriculture and what we've been doing. So the first thing is I want to make sure that people know that we are here to offer beyond the classroom experiences. We know that our students are going to take classes. We know they're going to have chemistry and everything else, but we want them to have that experience hands-on to enrich their curriculum. Here's a featured piece. We actually have a trading platform just created. This is a combination between two private investments, J.B. Penn and the Neil Griffin. Is almost $350,000. These students will actually do real-world trading, both stocks and futures. The picture here is a call-out meeting for students. We had about 34 students across the entire campus show up. Half of these, approximately half, are out of the College of Ag, almost half out of the College of Business, but we have students out of engineering and even science, a couple of those. Here's a brand new ticker. If you come by the College of Ag, we have a brand new ticker. We can control what stocks and information is on there. That was just installed here about a week ago. So our students will have real-world experience in doing some trading. We had an opening of, if you've passed by it, by the farmer's market. So August of 2023, we have the new Judd Hill Farmers Market building. If you haven't been in that facility, I invite you to do that. We have a state-of-the-art kitchen. There's 5 cooking stations. We have a retail shop where we market many of the products that our students produce. And if you drive up Aggie, you'll notice quickly to the left, you'll see rows of strawberries that will be there for this May. Again, speaking of the strawberries, these strawberries, we have time between now and May when they will come off. Our students are working on what does that look like in terms of marketing that product. So the idea is for them to work on the soil chemistry, the planting, and then think about the marketing plan and what would you do with those strawberries when you get to May. Our meat processing, we had received a large sum of money several years ago. We are a state plant now. In fact, we're plant number 001 with the state of Arkansas. We have students that are doing a wide range of hands-on activities. And we're soon to be launching our online store. So the online store will accommodate 2 things. One, you can actually place your orders there and pick them up at our retail store, which will be at the Judd Hills Farmers Market. And secondly, we're going to look at the option of drop shipping it to your home. So those of you that go to Florida during the winter, we'll be able to send you products directly from Arkansas State. So we're developing many new products. In fact, I leave today to go talk with the Arkansas Rice Group. So we want to make a sausage. It's kind of like a boudin, but we won't have liver in it. And we'll have some unique flavored sausages that we want to propose. So a lot of research and discovery. This is all done in cooperation with our director of the meat lab and our students. A project that we're quite proud about. You may have seen a little bit of this, but in Arkansas, we lead the entire nation in food insecurity. And disproportionately, that hits small children more than anyone else. We are working closely with Feed the Hungry and a hunter initiative. So what happens is people that actually harvest deer throughout the state of Arkansas, some of those deer are donated back. That meat's boned out. The boned out meat comes to us. We formulate it and put it into snack sticks. And in these snack sticks that we're holding here are actually put in backpacks of kids. It goes back to the county where it came from. We produced over 24,000 of these just during the fall season, and we're going to move forward with initiatives to do this in beef, pork, chicken, turkey, all the other ones, to do something year-round. We've had great partnerships with Greenway. Greenway is actively looking at some of our students to do intensive internships this summer. Those internships are both part-time, full-time, and they've created the Greenway Scholars. And part of that Scholars is for these students to have hands-on activities, leadership activities, and in here, meeting with one of the students here at Equine that is certainly engaged in these kind of activities. Our students certainly have the opportunity to go and meet with different companies. This is just an example with Farm Credit Mid-South. And then for our students to actually have the funding to actually go and visit with these different companies is something that's very important for us, for them to hear what's going on. I'd like to talk about, we have world-class research. Dr. Tina Teague is certainly working in the College of Ag and with the Division of Agriculture. This picture is taken at Judd Hill in Truman, and certainly doing world-class research that extends across both these institutions. And then I want to mention that we are involved in community engagement. We have done the Furry 5Ks where you bring your dog and you go for a walk during homecoming. But this past year, we increased that. We went with Ag and Autism. So we've partnered with them to create awareness. This has been a fantastic event we've done for 3 years in a row, and expect to be doing that again this coming fall. PICO. PICO's been a tremendous partner, built a state-of-the-art broiler complex with all the modern equipment, finished the first grow out of birds. This is in combination with faculty member Dr. Bud Kennedy and students. They just got the second group of birds 2 days ago, and those birds will be in there for about 60 days. Here, this actually touches many of the people in this room. So we had the very first class of certified crop advisors. So we had 6 students actually go into this training. 3 of them actually finished to be certified crop advisors. The idea is that when you graduate with that BS, you have that plus. You have the additional certificate. We have students that will start the second cohort this spring. And we have the Agriculture Academy. So we have actually contracted with Lisa Ritchie, who's going to bring on all the different kinds of leadership, executive experiences, professional development. We want to actually take our students to the next level on networking, how to have difficult conversations, how to do a variety of things that we know they're going to be involved in as they move up through the ranks in their professional lives. So just to summarize, we are now offering world-class experiences for our students beyond the classroom. And we have best-in-class leadership professional development offered. And we have raised the profile, and we are one of the leading colleges here in the Mid-South. So that's the end of my presentation, but I just want to give you an idea of what we're doing with our students, and that we're trying to create these experiences above and beyond the classroom, the traditional classroom, for these students to really have meaningful engagement outside that traditional classroom. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dean LaTour, for that, for those announcements and update on activities in the College of Agriculture. Our next speaker is listed in your program. You should have a brochure that you can follow along today, if you like. We're going to turn our attention to a discussion of some of the trends and issues which were prominent during this 30-year history of the A-State Agribusiness Conference. Our next speaker, Harrison Pittman, was the first person I invited to start building this year's program. Harrison has been here before. He's been on the program before. And when we mentioned that this is the 30th anniversary, Harrison said, well, I know the topic, Back to the Future, 30 years back to the future. So Harrison Pittman, director of the National Agricultural Law Center in Fayetteville, which is a unit of the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. The center serves as the nation's premier leading agricultural and food law research center. His work over the years has focused on Farm Bill, water, environmental law, pesticide regulation, and many other agricultural issues. Harrison's an Arkansan, native of Clarendon, and earned his degrees in agricultural law from the University of Arkansas. So here for his third time, Harrison Pittman. Thank you, Harrison. There's water there if you need it.
Actually, can you hear me okay? I'm actually from Helena. You said, but Clarendon's okay. I know what dirt roads feel like in the Monroe County area. Guys, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. We are going to do a little back to the future, sort of looking back and looking forward. I would like to sort of re-highlight just the legacy, Dr. Greenwalt, that you and others have. I know you didn't do it alone, but you've been tip of the spear, and not just this conference, but so much in ag education, and seeing at the dinner last night the students that are coming through to the internship program. Just what a legacy that is. It extends beyond just this, but it's a lesson in how, today we see Art and Hunter Byram and others that have benefited from the scholarships that you guys had an idea 30 years ago, or 31 years ago maybe, and ran with it, and here you are today. And so I think that's having planned conferences. I know how hard it is and how difficult it is to do, and so it's not a small feat. All right. I may move around a little bit, but I'll try to stay here for a little bit so I won't drive you guys too crazy. As I was sitting here thinking about 30 years ago, and I want you guys, real quick, were you here 30 years ago? A few hands. And I know there's a few people that weren't even born yet in the room 30 years ago. I kind of pictured 30 years ago Bert basically probably being about as nervous as he is right now, thinking this first speaker is a ding-dong. But 30 years ago, right at 30 years ago, I walked into and out of a military recruiter's office on University Avenue in Little Rock, Arkansas, the greatest miscommunication of all time. I walked in to join the Army, literally. I wasn't going to ask any questions. I just was going to the Army, and the recruiter just went into the spiel. And 15 to 20 minutes later, I thought, I think this is too good to be true. And coincidentally, I just saw Ben Pittman here. His nephew, Holt, and I are very close friends. And Holt was a year ahead of me. He was at Mississippi State University already. And he kept saying, man, you just need to come to college. You need to forget this Army thing. And so I went to a homecoming party at the Alpha Gamma Row House, and I thought college looked pretty fun as a high school senior. And further coincidence, the homecoming opponent that year was Arkansas State University. And I remember, I didn't go to the game, but it was tied 13-13. That's before we had overtime. But so here we are, full circle. All right. Having a little trouble with the clicker. I'm going to end up needing some help there. I can keep talking, but so think about where you guys were in your line of business 30 years ago, whether it's in the lending, whether you're farming, policy, education. Hey, I missed something. Oh, there we go. In 30 years, I'll figure out how to do Photoshop even better. Huh? Spoiler alert, yeah, we're traveling all around. There we go. All right. So at that time, and this is a quote that I sometimes think back on. This time, like all times, is a very good one if we but know what to do with it. And that I kind of put that out here for us to think forward and looking backwards, that decisions around us, they matter, particularly in the ag industry. The context in which we're making those decisions matter. And, things that were 30 years ago and things will be 30 years from now, they're really not that far away. And what I've done here, kind of broken this down into two questions. I've already kind of laid one out to you. But to kind of keep in mind that it's possible to get things right okay? Like we can get decisions in the ag industry, and we can get them wrong. And sometimes you get them wrong in good faith before you realize it was a mistake, but we don't have to get things wrong. They can be done in a good way. Before I turn to those two questions, for those of you who aren't familiar, Bert kind of teed up the Ag Law Center. I'm not going to say much more about it. We are a nonpartisan, objective resource to the nation's agricultural community. So we're headquartered in Fayetteville, but we do our work all over the United States, and we serve everybody in agriculture, from farmers and producers, landowners of all commodities, of all shapes and sizes, to policymakers at all levels, and attorneys, and everybody in between. We've been in place since 1987. You know, sometimes I wish I could travel like that and see what it was like just back then. I know y'all get the reference there, Back to the Future. All right. The feed, keeping up with the future, kind of keeping with that theme today. If you're interested in following highlights and updates in the ag law and policy arena, I know I've talked to several students here. This is an excellent resource. This is a newsletter that we put out. It comes out every 2 weeks. We keep it as short as possible, very short updates. By the time you get this, if you sign up for it, if you hadn't heard yet, a federal district court in Arizona vacated the registration for dicamba yesterday afternoon. Those are the kind of topics that we'll cover in depth, and I'll talk some more about here. But that's an excellent resource for you. And just think of that. We put that out every 2 weeks, and we always have to take something out. That's how much is going on in the ag space. We always end up taking things out. All right. So now let's go to these two questions. And in some of these, obviously think to yourself, the audience that would have been at this in that 1995 meeting, what was on their mind? What was going on? And everybody could look at that from a different perspective. We had our former governor, Bill Clinton, was the president of the United States. We had a massive change in Congress. We had gone to the Republican Revolution in the 1994 midterms. And so in 4 decades, both chambers of Congress switched party hands. Ag exports were pretty strong. I looked this up. Taylor Swift was about 5 years old. And Justin Bieber was just being born. So, and then we're going to talk about that just for a moment, but also be thinking about 30 years from now. If you could just sort of time travel, if you could be Marty and the professor there in Back to the Future and go 30 years from now, what questions in what part of the industry you're working in are you curious about and you're interested to see how it turned out? And I'm going to go through some of mine. Like if you could just go forward. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? How did it turn out? All right. That's that language at the top there. That was the title of the very first A-State Agribusiness Conference. The 1995 Farm Bill, that tells you a lot right there because it turned out to be the 1996 Farm Bill. The 1995 Farm Bill, Commodity Outlook and Issues, and the Environmental Success of High-Yield Farming. And when I saw that, I thought, how much outside of an audience like this, how much the attitude has changed towards agriculture. Like, where at that time it'd be very easy to talk about the environmental, like the positives of the environment. And now that's, I'm just talking in terms of people's perception. Like, it's changed a lot. People look at that and say, well, that's actually what's hurting the environment. And so the world in which agriculture is operating has changed dramatically. And we're going to touch more on that here in just a moment. And then saving the planet with pesticides and free trade. That was another one of the highlight sessions from that conference. And again, I saw that and thought, I think the pesticide industry and the crop protection industry is the one thing that has changed the most in my time in what I do in the last almost 24 years. And I think it's going to continue to change. And I highlighted the lawsuit with dicamba out in the federal district court in Arizona that issued a ruling just yesterday. But how much this has changed. And at that point, in 1994, we're talking about free trade. We had the 1980s farm crisis was It was on Greg Cole's mind still, I'm certain. But it was becoming more in the rearview mirror, still a fresh memory. We were in the very last year of the 1990 Farm Bill. And we were about to go into what we experimented with called freedom to farm. And we actually had a debate during that time of actual proposals to just, like today we talk about what will the farm safety net be. There was a discussion of not having ag subsidies. And that was, again, that was part of that, the political context we had at the time. Similar to today, bigger numbers. We had a very significant federal budget deficit, and that factored in to a lot of the discussions. And, somewhere around, I don't know the exact date, but in doing any number of Farm Bill presentations in the last 20 plus years, somewhere in the early 2000s, I was able to say, I remember I was at the Methodist Church in Marvel, Arkansas, talking to producers there, and I said, so we have the largest deficit in American history. I could have gone back every single day to that same place and made that same sentence, and it would have been true every single day since that time. And so that, I think, factors large in how we navigate the decisions we have to make. And I mentioned the ag exports were generally strong, and so that helped set that policy context with the Farm Bill back at that time, of course. Some other things that were going on that you might attach to today's events. And it was in that order. Ukraine declared its independence, and then the Soviet Union dissolved. And look at where we are today. The former Soviet Union has invaded to basically take that independence away. In 1994, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, the last Russian troops left Germany. It seems so foreign today to think about, but it wasn't that long ago. We established the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now we're moved forward to USMCA. Now we're on the second version of that. At the same time, those next two bullet points, the World Trade Organization created, that was just an evolution out of the victory from World War II. And prior to the WTO, we had the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And the basic premise behind it was countries that trade together don't fight each other. They don't go to war with each other. And so to have more economic interdependence with Europe and other parts of the world, this moved us into the WTO. And at the same time, that's when the Agreement on Agriculture was put in place. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, you'll know a piece of what I'm talking about there. The Agreement on Agriculture was the first time that there were some serious trade rules established specifically with respect to agriculture. That's what led to the WTO cotton case in the early 2000s, where Brazil challenged U.S. programs through the cotton program, and the World Trade Organization ruled that they were in violation of these trade rules. And it has had a tremendous impact on the types of farm programs that we've had in the Farm Bill since then, particularly under Title I. The first GM crops were planted. The Flavor Saver tomato was the first up, and then we started getting into the other crops. And I'll come back to that theme because I think that ties in very closely with where we are with the future of innovation in agriculture and the future of innovation in other sectors of the economy when you think about how much agriculture drives that. Because, back then, we're really, it's obviously we're in the Roundup, glyphosate. And we've now moved into the next generations of technology, like dicamba, where you're merging the seed and the spray. You have two forms of biotechnology, and you can't really have one without the other. And so I think that to me, I was in Washington, D.C. before I came here with the National Association State Departments of Agriculture. And someone asked me, it's like, they just said, I just want to pick your brain. What do you think the biggest issue in agriculture is? I said, I think it's the future of the crop protection industry. And I think how that relates to ag biotechnology, because they go hand in hand now. And they said, tell me more. I said, all right. I said, I'm not a science guy, but the periodic table, I don't think we're going to add another box to it in the rest of my life. I think we know the chemistry. Unless we find something on Mars and bring it back and it works. I said, so I think that we don't have a lot new technologies to run through the system. And this now presents what used to be coexistence between, 20 years ago, coexistence was about production agriculture and organic producers. Could they produce side by side? Could they coexist? And now I think the riddle to be solved now is coexistence within production agriculture. And again, that features heavy with ag biotech and our pesticide technology. And then another example, the checkoff programs. Now these easily bring in $1 billion or more to the ag industry year over year when you add up all the commodities. Like soybeans, for example, 1990 Farm Bill. We were just 4 or 5 years into collecting the soybean assessment at that time. And I'll come back to that. All right, there's my attempt at Photoshop. And if I'm lucky enough to be around and walk in 30 years from now, I'll do better. But Microsoft Paint and just a little bit of time, and you can figure this out too. But I can just envision 30 years from now, there's the professor coming back and trying to save the world. All right, in no particular order. So I asked, I told you guys, think about questions that you have, things that you would be curious about, in the line of work that you're in, on your farm, whatever part of the ag industry you're in. What curiosity do you have about how these issues played out? These are mine, so discount every single one of them. But these are the thoughts. If I could go forward in 30 years, these are the boxes I'd want to check off. Is there still a farm bill? Have we already seen the last farm bill? I think we've gotten as close to that as you can get. I think we still will, by the way. That's not doom and gloom, but it's getting harder and harder and harder to do. So by that time, I'm curious, will we have already had the last farm bill? And these have been enacted since the Great Depression. This was the original New Deal program when Franklin Roosevelt was elected president. And we've been enacting these roughly every 4 to 7 years since 1933. But they've gotten harder and harder to do. But they are central to production agriculture and everything we know about the industry. And when you think about Congress today, think about Congress 30 years from now. I would go ahead and predict that there will be even less members of Congress from rural districts or with ag constituencies that they're dependent upon than there are today. And so you have to think this through, how those change. Is there a farm safety net? I think that's still a question. When you think about the federal budget deficit and the different, legitimate competing philosophical differences over the role of government, do we try it again? Do we go back and try the 1996 experiment again at some point? Is there still an agriculture committee in the United States House of Representatives or the Senate Ag Committee? That seems distant and somewhat ludicrous to ask that, I'll admit that. But I typically will get asked questions about like the nutrition title. Should we separate the nutrition title from the farm bill? Should we just have the farm bill just be farming? And I'm just talking, people can have different opinions about that. I'm not trying to persuade, but just the raw politics, it's true, the Farm Bill, 75% or more, and it's at the or more part right now, is nutrition. And the agriculture component, conservation programs, Title I, ARC, PLC, those are actually a really small percentage of the overall funding. That's true. But all of it gets controlled by those ag committees, that funding. And so I do think there is a risk, if you think in 30 years, not 3 years, we're thinking 30 years, there is a risk. If you separate that, the question becomes, well, what should be the committee of jurisdiction for this nutrition title? And maybe that goes over to Health and Human Services, and then you're in a different ballgame. And then you're left with the others, and someone says eventually, well, what about these conservation programs? Maybe they'd fit better in the Environmental Public Works Committee, because it looks a whole lot more like that. And then before long, you're wondering, what do we have an ag committee for? And that, I just put that out there. I don't think that's likely to happen, by the way, but those are the kind of things that can occur over a 30-year period. The crop protection industry. I am really, if I came out of that time machine, the Vandalorian or whatever that car is called, that's actually the first box I'm going to go check. I'm super curious how this worked out. because you take the technologies that people are familiar with, glyphosate, chlorpyrifos, paraquat, and now dicamba, there is no product left that's not going to be hard as heck to get approved by EPA in the first place. Then there's going to be legal challenges on two fronts. One is just whether the product can stay on the market. Was it approved properly? We've already seen this. That's not imaginary. That's already happening. And the other are the raft of civil lawsuits, basically personal injury lawsuits, claiming that the product's injured, caused cancer, and so forth. Just in the last several days, just one verdict alone against Monsanto was $2.5 billion out of a jury, with a B, and that's not the first one. And there's thousands of these cases in the pipeline. And paraquat, right behind it, I've alluded twice to dicamba. There has been a challenge to the label. It's the same plaintiffs, the same defendants, as everything. It's a cookie cutter from 2020 when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals removed the registration of dicamba during the growing season. And, you know, think about that. The Ninth Circuit, I know most of y'all would not have a reason to know precisely what I'm talking about there. In the federal court system, you have federal district courts, and they have court of appeals above them, and they're broken into regions. Well, the Ninth Circuit is all the way out west, okay? It's California and the states that touch it and one or two that touch it, where these products aren't even registered. And what happened, those same plaintiffs, they challenged the new label when it came out at the Ninth Circuit. They got the same three-judge panel they got the previous time. American Soybean Association, Plains Cotton Growers, they filed a separate action in a different jurisdiction and managed to kind of drag them out like cats into like bobcats in a potato sack. They didn't want to go. They pulled them out of the Ninth Circuit and went over to the District of Columbia. That played out, and they refiled at the Arizona Federal District Court. And when I got up yesterday, if you would have asked me about that, I'd have said they're a long ways off from a decision. It seems like they're moving real slow. And on my flight here, they issued a decision. It stunned me. And they ruled that EPA did not properly register the product, and they're ordering that it be vacated from the market. There's still questions to be answered about the immediacy of that decision, but that's a huge, that's just fill in the blank. We're talking about dicamba. It's any other product going to face. I talked about coexistence already. I think in ag biotech, I think those go hand in hand. You know, will farmers still want to adopt ag biotech on the farm? I would think so, but in this environment, you think about the research and development that has to go into developing products in the first place. And the seed has to go through a regulatory process, the spray has to go through a regulatory process. And at some point, if you know you're going to have a hard time getting it done, and then you're going to be sued and you have open-ended liability, you know, that's a tough equation from a business model. It can be navigated, but it's not easy to navigate. Other questions I've had. How did the Russian invasion of Ukraine conclude? Because it'll eventually end somehow, some way. And there's going to be somebody that wins that, and there's going to be somebody that loses that. That's just the raw reality of it. What does that look like? The fertilizer that comes out of that part of the world, the highly productive land, the markets, where does that go? Are we, in the United States, are we dealing with a democracy that sees generally the world the way we do? Or are we dealing with an autocrat that has invaded that country and taken it? In 30 years, we're going to know that. We're going to have that answer. We'll probably have it for 30 years, but we're going to know the consequences of it. Does Ukraine exist? I don't think that can be taken for granted. What government controls the lands and the fertilizer markets, et cetera, and what we currently call Ukraine? Did we have a conflict? I didn't put military conflict, by the way, just conflict in general. How did this work out with China? And, you know, because any type of prolonged conflict with them will put strain on supply chains around the world. You consider that they're our largest trading partner. That's where, like, when they're buying our ag products, we do better. And, but how do we navigate that relationship? A very difficult one. It matters and how that plays out. And do we, when you just go into Walmart, look on the shelf, where does this stuff come from? And that we purchase and use every day. And so prolonged, increased conflict there, economic or military, very well not just put pressure on supply chains, but around the globe, but redraw them. I know these are kind of random, I come at it from different directions, but these are where my thoughts were. How well did we navigate the competing pressures, which are unprecedented at one time, from the need to have agricultural production? I'm sure Greg is going to talk about population growth and projections in that arena, because we're asking a lot from rural land and private landowners. We're asking a whole lot. I was out in West Texas just a few days ago, and once I got past Lubbock, there was never a point where you couldn't see more than 2 or 3 dozen wind turbines anywhere, and it was typically a lot more than that. I traveled up to one little area with a gentleman there, and it was the joke was on me, of course. And I looked out and I said, "I didn't think y'all guys had any water." I said, "What lake is that out there?" And he said, "That's a solar farm." It was so large, it looked like a lake to me. It wasn't like a large one still that you might see driving down I-40 or something like that. This was huge. It looked like you'd have a boat on it driving around. And now we're talking about carbon sequestration. We have urban encroachment into rural lands, and that creates all kinds of pressure from land value, which has an impact on people's incentive to stay in farming. Natural gas, wind, solar, all of that. We're asking all of that at the same time. And we're wanting people to somehow, they have to make rational decisions with the asset. I'm curious how that turns out in groundwater and surface water management in Arkansas and other states. There are a lot of lessons. If you look out west, things that they didn't do that they could have done make their lives easier today, particularly in agriculture. And things that they did do that worked or didn't work. There's a lot of lessons there for us. And if you started them today, you might get some of them underway in 30 years. Like that, to navigate those challenges could take that long. I am really curious if anybody ever makes any damn money on carbon contracts. I didn't want to put the word down, I just want to say it. I didn't want to put it in the slide. And I mean, did people really make money with it? I mean, a lot of producers. Was it lucrative? Was it certain? Did it actually pan out? I'm really curious about that one. Did any of this move into the carbon space? And I know there's stories that have been quite successful and others that didn't match that. But I mean in the aggregate, for this thing to really work, for the needle to move. Did it work for producers? Did it work for the lenders? Did it work for the industry? I'm super curious about that. I'm not ever going to try cell cultured meat, but I'm talking about, like meat in a petri dish. I'm curious, did that ever catch on? My bet's going to be on no, but I'm curious. At least for a consumer of one, it won't. And then indoor agriculture. I think that's growing faster than we might otherwise recognize, and I'm curious how that goes. Growing under UV lights, I think there's a lot more of that happening. I think I may just have one. This may be my last one. I can't remember. Foreign ownership. If you go back to 94 and 95, obviously it's a huge issue around the country today. We were probably around 25, less than 50% of overall acreage being in foreign ownership at that time compared to today. I mean, it's more than doubled since that time. But there is a tremendous amount of foreign investment in the ag industry, not just in all, like from processors to grocers to grain elevators. It's very widespread. 2/3 of foreign ownership has always been out of 5 or 6 countries, led by Canada, followed by Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. And a lot of that foreign investment today goes back to a previous bullet point. Solar, wind, There's a lot of these investors that they're invested in like renewable energy in the United States. A huge one, that next bullet point, Prop 12. If you're not familiar with that, I can break it down in 2 or 3 sentences. California, a few years ago, passed an animal welfare law. So basically created animal welfare standards, particularly for, in this instance, I'll just focus on swine. So instead to grow and sell pork, or to sell pork in the state of California, you must grow it this way. You must meet these animal welfare standards. But they went one step farther, and they said, and by the way, that applies to everybody else too. So whether you're in Arkansas or anywhere else, the other 49 states and other countries, if you're going to sell that product in California, you must also produce it according to our state standards. And in the United States Constitution, there's the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the authority to regulate commerce among the tribes, foreign nations, and the states. And so there's a doctrine that's been called the Dormant Commerce Clause, and it's basically those parts of commerce that don't squarely fall in the province of the federal government, to what extent can states regulate? Okay, that sounds dull. It sounds really esoteric. That's one of the biggest issues going forward in ag, because all of that's about supply chain. That is all about chains of commerce. And in the United States Supreme Court, the current court issued a ruling, and they basically ruled in favor of California. They said you can do this. Now, might this matter going forward? Just look back a couple years. Could pick other examples, but the state of New York, last legislative session, they passed a state law that would begin to eliminate the use of neonicotinoids in the state of New York. They're not the only one to go that direction. That was before Prop 12 was decided. So what stops them, or anybody else for that matter, saying, you know what, that wasn't quite far enough? What we want to do is say that unless you can verify that this product wasn't produced using neonicotinoids, you can't sell it in the state of New York. And I could go through 50 other examples like that. And we're right now around the country, legislative sessions are coming in, and there's a variety of bills, some ag-related, some not. They're testing the boundaries on this. And it will define commerce. And when you take an industry like agriculture that does nothing but put things in commerce 24/7, it's a big deal. We're getting towards the end. All right. Corporate Transparency Act. Quick show of hands. Do you know what the heck I'm talking about when I say Corporate Transparency Act? I see one hand. I saw 2. Just a handful. One of the biggest stories right there. And particularly in agriculture. This was enacted in 2021. It just became effective the beginning of this year. And it requires registered entities. So think anything that registers with the Secretary of State, like a limited liability company, an S corporation. Its intent is to be an anti-fraud measure, a transparency measure, but they basically want rank, serial number, rank, name. They want information as to who's inside this LLC, who's inside this S corporation, and they want to identify whether you're a U.S. entity or a foreign entity, foreign individual or a U.S. individual. And so everybody has to go through this. So if you have an LLC, like if you have a farming operation right now, and you may have a partnership at the top and you got business entities underneath it, every one of those has to file. If you don't do it within the prescribed timeline, for those that currently exist, the timeline is the end of this calendar year, by the way. There are civil penalties associated with noncompliance, and there are potential criminal penalties with it, like fines and imprisonment. I have a feeling, I speak to a lot of different groups, farmer groups, others. I would estimate the hands that went up, we were probably around 4% of the room had indicated that they were familiar with the Corporate Transparency Act. I rarely get more than 15 or 20 hands out of a large audience. And it's nobody's job. Compare this, let me finish that thought so you understand what I'm saying. It's nobody's job to tell people that this thing is out there. In other words, compare that like with a USDA program, conservation program, or a new disaster relief, and there's fact sheets that come out, there's a press shop, things go out through extension, all your normal means of communication. They don't apply here. Congress enacted this, and there's nobody, the Department of Treasury, it's nobody's job to go out and communicate to the world this is happening. And so I have a feeling that once it starts percolating more and more, people are going to be like, Say, what? And so I'm wondering if it survives. There are no exceptions for agriculture. There's no exception specific to agriculture in that. I am very interested to see if that thing stays intact, and if so, what it looks like. Because it's designed to go, like, if you create a new LLC, I think you have, I won't get the date right, you either have 30, 60, or 90 days. I just can't remember right now. And so, pretty quick timeline. I know we have some CPAs here. That's the way that I find most people are discovering it, because they're receiving a letter from their CPA that says, heads up on two things. This exists. You're going to be the one that needs to do it, because I ain't touching it with a 10-foot pole. Because of the liability concerns. And I know law firms, large law firms, they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're wanting to go out to third parties and have them hold the risk. It reminds me a lot of, if you ever had to deal with mold and getting mold removed from a home or something like that. You can find people who are really good at it, and they can get it all, but they do not want to certify they got it all, because they don't want to be on the hook forever. And that's the same thing here. You're going to have people that they don't want to be the one that submits the information, because your accountant, I think an attorney would have to sign if they're the ones that submit. So that liability is going to be pushed down towards the owner. The Supreme Court, its impact on the ag industry. You could tackle this any number of ways. You have Waters of the United States. That'll likely go back. We've seen this Prop 12 decision. We right now have a decision before the Supreme Court. They'll issue a ruling somewhere between now and probably June of this year over what's called Chevron deference, and that's a level of deference that courts should give or must give to agency decision-making. When you consider that agriculture is the most heavily regulated industry in the United States, then that's a huge decision, whether you're dealing with EPA or USDA. Any Department of Interior now, Fish and Wildlife Service is now, through the new Endangered Species Act, pesticide rules, they're a new entrant into the ag industry. But the Supreme Court have a huge impact here. Another one I would highlight, and I mentioned checkoff programs. 30 years ago, if we were here, we were basically a decade removed from the creation of the beef checkoff. We were just 5 or 6 years removed from the statutory creation of the soybean checkoff. Those programs in the mid to late 1990s and into the early 2000s, they took on a lot of constitutional challenges. And the argument was that they violated the First Amendment, because the argument went like this. You would have a producer or a citizen with standing who said, I am being told by the government to pay an assessment to then fund speech with which I disagree. And so where it was most prominent would be in the cattle industry. And they'd say, you're basically just telling people to go eat more beef, and I disagree with it. I don't want to have to support that. I'm watering that argument down some, but that's where it went. And across the court system at that time, including the jurisdiction that we're in, 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, they were struck down. Those programs were on their deathbed legally. And it went to the United States Supreme Court. And in 2005, it was a landmark decision in the area known as government speech. It happened to be applied to the checkoff programs, but the court ruled that there was sufficient government oversight so that it did not violate the First Amendment, okay? And so that would be like being down 3 points and somebody hitting or 2 points, let's put it that way, and they hit a three-pointer from one end of the court to the other and win the ball game, because that game was over. And it turned around at that one decision. And then the cases that had come up, I got 5 minutes, I bet he's been doing that for 30 years too. He's enjoying that too much. But the other challenges failed. Those same arguments have come up. The court has changed. And I do think that when I put that issue about Supreme Court, if in everyday living, our definitions of what is liberal or conservative means a certain thing. When you think about liberal or conservative in terms of judicial philosophy, it often means something quite different. And meaning, I won't go into super excruciating detail, but the textualism, how plainly do you read the United States Constitution? A more traditional conservative judicial viewpoint would be a more restricted role of the government. And again, when you juxtapose that with an ag industry that has particularly really the modern day industry was born in the 1930s with the first Farm Bill, and it represented the most significant ever, and like in the first time ever, intervention of the federal government into the economy. And everything has grown out of that. So much of it has grown out of that. That philosophically is directly at odds with a more conservative viewpoint of the role of government. And that can produce some great things. It could produce some unintended things. But I think that's a big one to watch. And the checkoff programs are a big one. I do think they'll go back to the United States Supreme Court. I do think by the time we're here, maybe even 10 years from now, we're going to know the answer there. Love them or hate them, there is no other way to get that amount of money into the ag industry. It does not exist. There's no state or federal appropriation that could come out every year that supported the industry in the aggregate in that way. So that's a huge one. And I think, and the reason is, in 2018, the Supreme Court issued a decision. It dealt with something that some people think looks very similar, others don't think it looks that similar, but it's public service union dues, meaning you have a state has a state law, and it says, well, if you're a government employee, then you're required to pay in to the service union for collective bargaining. And over the years, there was a compromise struck where those individuals would have to opt in to do, like, for political speech, but they could be required to pay for the collective bargaining aspect. In 2018, the United States Supreme Court just knocked that one on over and just said, now you have to give that person the ability to opt in to pay in the first place no matter what. Where the argument has come up is like, well, for those who say, well, that looks just like checkoff programs, that would be the same thing as saying voluntary at the point of sale. That would be the end of mandatory checkoff programs. And I think that issue will, at some point, work its way through the court system and be in the Supreme Court. And it'll be a battle between Johans and Janus. All right, my last thoughts. I bet I got like 30 seconds left now. These may make no sense to anybody. These are just my musings to wrap us up. Something to keep in mind. Agriculture is an extraordinarily mature industry. I would make a joke about agriculture and prostitution here, but I'm not going to do that. But it is a very old profession, let's say that. It's got its own, and has since the 1800s. It's an industry that had its own cabinet secretary to the U.S. president. It's extraordinarily dynamic, constantly changing. And like in the last, you could look at, if I could put a slide up that showed places I've been and spoken at in the last just few months to a year. It's the 97th annual this, the 68th annual that. Every state, every commodity, it's very organized, it's very mature. That's a strength that other industries don't have. That's very unique to agriculture, and that's something to keep in mind as we look forward those 30 years and how you navigate a political landscape. No matter what, I think agriculture will always be about moving dirt, water, and money, no matter what you're doing, no matter what kind of ag you're in, no matter what you're involved in. That's what it comes down to. And to do that successfully enough year over year to be able to do it again the next year. The last one, I probably could have framed that more artfully, but agriculture in the United States, you just can't have one without the other. What I'm really trying to drive home there is, the success of the country, it won't be there without agriculture. That's just a fact. And you see, you look at trade export, when we have strong exports, it'll be ag that carries that. And when you have, rural communities, rural economies, it's going to run through ag. And so the health of the country is directly tied. And the health of the country, our democratic process, as we're seeing in Congress now, we're virtually at some form of deadlock, doesn't even quite grab it right now. We're dealing with a lot of stuff. We're not formally enough yet dealing with the Farm Bill quite enough. And it's as important as it is, it's down the list of items at the moment. And so it would, even in a more smooth time period, would be challenging with everything else on top of it. We have a government shutdown potentially coming in I think, March now. It's hard to keep up with all the dates. All that matters in all of this. And then I'll end where I started. This time, like all times, is a very good one if we but know what to do with it. And I don't know what to do with it. I would like to get in the time machine. I would like to go forward and come back and tell you guys, hey, y'all might want to stick around here. You don't want, I don't know. That would be like, we Back to the Future. Dr. Greenwalt and Harrison Pittman. It'll be a good time. Hey, thank you guys.
Well, thank you, Harrison. You can see why he was the first I invited, and he came up with the theme, 30 years Back to the Future. Let me invite everyone who's been coming in to move on into the auditorium. We have a lot of empty seats down here in this middle section. If everyone would help allow them to take a seat. We'll move immediately into our next presentation. Our next speaker is Greg Coble, President and CEO of AgHeritage Farm Credit Services. Greg has 40 years of experience in the farm credit system, and that followed his graduation here at Arkansas State from the College of Agriculture. Greg earned his bachelor's here in agribusiness and economics and is a graduate of the LSU Graduate School of Banking. I always enjoy visiting with Greg, and I always learn something when he shares his observations. He speaks around the country to different groups. He's a student of agriculture all across the country. He's a big thinker, and this is his third presentation, Greg, to the A-State Agribusiness Conference. Welcome, Greg Coble.
Thanks, Bert. Good morning. Want to acknowledge Bert Greenwalt. 30 years, can't believe it's been that long, Bert, with that. And I really want to acknowledge this and I do. It's a pleasure. I get to travel throughout the United States and go to conferences and hear speakers all the time. And, you know, I put this conference, Bert, up against any of them, and it's here at home. So it's a great venue of knowledge exchange, intellectual dialogue, and networking, which is a key ingredient for growth and success, and I acknowledge that. Before I get started, I do want to acknowledge I'm very grateful and very excited to be back on the campus of Arkansas State University. I spent 4 of my best years here, definitely the most fun years. But I can tell you I'm a product of a good education system, and educators make a difference. And Dr. Lou Brinkley, where are you at? I want to call you out and recognize. Dr. Brinkley, for me, was a game changer. He was my advisor. When I walked on this campus here in 1981, after transferring from another university playing football, I was bound and determined to get a degree in education and coach football. And though I worked in agriculture in the summer in Harrisburg at a co-op, one of my fraternity brothers introduced me to Dr. Brinkley, and he convinced me I could fulfill my career and life objectives in agriculture versus coaching football, with trying to make a difference, serving others through coaching others in a highly competitive, challenging environment. And you sure got the highly competitive, challenging environment after almost 40 years. So I wanted to recognize ASU and Dr. Brinkley, because they were game changers for me. All right, as we go back into the theme and going back to Harrison, and as we look back and look forward, that's what we're going to talk about here. My conversation is around basically the themes, basically the observations of the emerging trends and dynamics in agriculture. And we're going to look back and we're going to look forward, where agriculture's come, where it's going, and what are the keys to the game for producers to win and succeed in the futures, and what are their differentiators? Just to give you a little backdrop from where I'm coming from. When I walked off this campus almost 40 years ago to start my career with Farm Credit, I've had a front row seat of watching the great game of the practical application of ag economics play out. A front seat here in Arkansas, especially in eastern Arkansas. I got to see 2 siblings start farming almost at the same time from the same parents, with the same resources of land, equipment, and money, go through the same economic, weather, and political cycles. One become very successful and wealthy, and one failed and was bankrupt. And that's what we're going to talk about, and what are the differentiators in agriculture today and going forward. Who are going to be the players that make it, and who are the ones that may not work out for them? That's what I want to examine in this and give you a lot of observations of 40 years of this lens. I've always said, Playing agriculture here in the Mid-South is like playing the SEC in football. There's no easy Saturdays, and you better show up prepared or somebody better get hurt. Not anybody can farm here in the Delta, and not anybody can lose money. So that's my background. All right, let's dive into this. In the early 1900s, think about what we saw in U.S. agriculture. We had lots of farms, and they were all small. Throughout the homestead, all the journey west. I just got to go to Oregon last year, and I want to see where the Oregon Trail went to, that Willamette Valley out there, what they were doing. And all these farms are small. And then over this time, obviously today, the farms, we have a lot less farmers, and they're a lot bigger. The last ag census here basically said, farms are consolidating. We're down to 107,000, or 5% of the producers that produce 75% of the output. Economists project within 10 to 15 years we're down to 75,000. There's no other region in the whole United States where that's more relevant than right here in eastern Arkansas, the Mississippi Delta there. Now here's the ironic of this. 107,000, the biggest football stadium in the United States, University of Michigan. I was there earlier this year. Okay, 107,000, so in 10 to 15 years you can put them in Razorback Stadium, which is 75,000. And what's interesting, Bert, I was at a conference 20 years ago in the Peabody in Memphis, and economists put up there a schematic of the University of Michigan Stadium and predicted this. They said, we're going to get to this time frame where we're at now and be down to 107, and then 10 to 15 years later we can take the whole top section. So agriculture is consolidating and things are moving on. What we're really seeing here, and really break it down in a little more macro terms, is about bifurcation of agriculture. The mid-sized farm is becoming displaced. Now we got a lot of part-time farms, a lot of hobby farms, local food producers, and then large commercial producers that are very complex, and there are a lot less numbers. There's no other, again, place other than here in eastern Arkansas where this whole trend is more highlighted, because here we don't have a lot of non-farm income. We're irrigated. So unlike the Midwest where people, professors, farm credit employees, somebody that may work in a profession and farm 400 or 500 acres of crop or 1,000, that doesn't happen here because of irrigation and things. So you either get bigger or you get out pretty well here. So that's a little bit of the highlight, and it continues to what I call the separation between the very large and the very small is going on. All right, let's talk about a macro factor of what's driving this over the 100-year period. And I'm going to talk about macro factors and get into a more macro factor of drivers. This is the slide here that I use all the time in strategic planning here. Dr. Danny Kleinfelder, one of my biggest fans, Bert, he passed away. I follow him. He started TPAP. Recommend it. It's a game changer program at Texas A&M that he started here. So this is what I call the blocking and tackling. You can read the top bullet here, but let me summarize it is. In the markets. Markets always rationalize to equilibrium at some point. At a point where every farmer's making money, that doesn't last. When all farmers are losing money, that lasts. It all rationalize to equilibrium. When you get to equilibrium, the top end of the farmers are profitable and growing. The average is hanging in there, and the bottom third basically or you have a bottom third. And what does that really mean is that over time, the top third will take out the bottom third. Now, I get asked this question all the time, do you mean you're in the bottom third, you're going to go out of this? No, it just means you're more susceptible to cycles of economy. Bert, it's like having a C versus an A. A C's closer to flunking out than an A. I can relate to that when I was here, by the way. So that's what's going on. Richard Brock, I follow him a lot. He's been to this conference. He's always had a good saying. He said, bad economies doesn't cause business failures. They expose bad business. So the point is you want to be in the upper third here. And, Harrison, all the law, I remember when I speak at his conference, all the lawyers tell this. They always say, don't go to law school. If you're going to finish in the bottom 25 of your class, you might starve to death. So that was always a good one there. So what is going on here is the key to making it is that business success and survival is based upon continuous improvement at a pace to stay ahead of the pack. I will talk more about it. It's about you to get better or you get out. And that's it. All right, let's take one final thing. Let me summarize this in more layman's terms of what's going on in agriculture. Here's what I always say. Agriculture is not immune to capitalism. Capitalism is real. And the same thing that happens here in the Mississippi Delta is the same thing with what I call the sun comes up over the west levee of the Mississippi River. Is the same dynamic happens in Africa, and you've heard the story. There is a lion and there's a gazelle. If the lion doesn't run fast enough to catch the gazelle, it starves and dies. If the gazelle does not outrun the lion, it dies. The key, you got to run fast and smart. Those do that get to play another day. Those that don't, and that's what's happening in agriculture, the producer and everybody around that supports them. So that's the underlying. Now let's just dig into a little more macro factors here. Obviously, when you look at the drivers of consolidation, the need for scale of technology, efficiency is everything. Whoever becomes the most efficient while managing the risk is going to be the ones that win. With all the technology and automation, doing more with less, technology costs money. You've got to have scale. Define scale is a family, two couples go to one of your nice restaurants, Omar's, and you have a $200 steak dinner. One farms 5,000 acres and one farms 2,000 acres. Take the bill and divide it by those acres, and that shows you relativity. So the point is, it does matter there. Farm policy has a big influence, I've seen over the years, about consolidation. The stronger the farm policy, the less the consolidation rate, the more weaker the farm policy, the safety net. You know, we're fortunate here, and I know I spoke at Harrison's, was it 14, after the farm bill there. And I remember after we went through the 14 into a new farm bill, I made a statement. After we come off the last super cycle in agriculture in 2013, I said, if this thing stays down for an extended period of time, we could lose the bottom 25. And then I think I was quoted in the Delta Farm Press, and then I was asked 4 years later at his conference why it happened. I said, thank God for PLC. Our program actually worked here in the Mid-South. So let's give a shout out to the congressional delegations, because that was it. It provided significant subsidy and help when help is needed there. So that's a big factor there. But here's a big thing that I say is driving farm structure and consolidation. And I'm going to drill it down here in eastern Arkansas. It's a demographic. You know, the average age is 58 years old. And then look at the succession rate. For over 30 years, Bert, every time I talk to people out, customers, farm groups in eastern Arkansas, I say, how many of you have a succession plan? I'm not talking about formal plan. Out of 10 in a sample group, how many of you have son, daughter, niece, nephew, significant others going to take over your operation whether you're 46, 58, or whatever? The average in that is 1 in 3. That's the stat. Some more, some less. Let's break down what that really means. And I talked about this at the luncheon speaker, my conversation I had here in 2010. All right, so if the average size farm is 3,000 acres, I have 3,000, Harrison has 3, and Bert has 3. I don't have a successor, Harrison doesn't, but Bert does. Well, when we step down, say average age is 58, step down from leadership of farm from 65 to 70, so 7 to 12 years, that land is going to be rented at a certain price, so Bert's successor is going to triple in size. And when you look back of that trend and where it is now, that's what's driving this. So succession rate is a big factor there. That means the next generation has to have a stronger, deeper skill set to succeed. All right, we talked about getting bigger. We're talking about consolidation. Let's talk about the big debate over, is it better or bigger? And I always get this, what's the right size of a crop operation? Well, I can tell you, getting bigger is not always better. It can be. The key is you want to get better before you get bigger. And let's break this down. Here are 2 streams that I observed over my 40 years. One of the biggest train wrecks you have usually in farming operations is undisciplined growth. Just growing too quickly, renting ground at whatever rate, cannot build the equity and liquidity to sustain. Or you get out of your wheelhouse so you don't have the skills to manage at that level. The other side is that you've got farming operations where they're growing paychecks faster than acres. And you know what that means. Bringing somebody, here's the kiss of death. You bring a son or daughter back from college, put them at the farm, pay them more than your best hired hand, and they produce half the productivity. That's the kiss of death. So the deal is that scale matters. Big is not always the key to it, other than over time. Scale does matter. You can get that informally, just like in the poultry business. It used to be it was 2 to 4 houses, now it's 6 to 8 houses. So the big thing is there, and Dave Cole, I follow him a lot. He says better is better versus big is better, but that's the debate over that, even though over time we all will continue to get bigger. All right, the other thing is that when you look at agriculture, the cost of entry to agriculture is going up, both financially and from intellectual capital. It was quoted a few years ago in the Farm Journal, I believe it was, no, it's Farm Journal, that an individual, your son or daughter, has a better chance of making it to the NBA is walk off the street and become a commercial farmer. An idea of the amount of capital that you've got to have. The other thing that I really harp on, you hear more of me, I'm going to really dive into, is the intellectual capital. If you don't have that, you don't play. I said those that you obtain the intellectual capital will generate the financial capital. Those that inherit financial capital but don't have the intellectual capital, it'll eventually erode. Because I've got to see the times when I've seen people that started with nothing accumulate a lot of acres and a lot of wealth. I've seen a lot of people were born into a lot of wealth and a lot of acres and lost it all. And it all comes down to that skill set and mindset that I'll talk more about here. All right, here's the thing, farm succession. Do a whole presentation on that. Only hit on one thing. And I'm going to hit on the thing that nobody talks about, and I observe it in almost 40 years. You know, farmers and get ready to do succession. They get the best attorneys, the best tax accountants, and state planning, and all the things there. One thing they fail to do, because it's tough and it's emotional, just because your kids are fortunate enough and lucky enough to inherit what you, your granddad, or your dad or granddad, or the combination there has built over time, doesn't mean they're lucky enough to inherit the skill sets and mindsets to manage that wealth and assets. So you never really assess that because it's hard, it's subjective. I understand that. I have 2 sons. One graduated from here. It's a difference between being chairman and CEO of your business and a father. This is where it is. Don't pass on family assets and farming to individuals that don't have the mindset and skill set. That's setting them up. Just like in our business, when we hire people, we look at assessments and skills. When the board replaces me, they look at all these assessments and things that says high probability of success. And so what we say in HR 101, when you have a problem, it's at hiring and promoting. You take somebody that may be good at something and promote them in something they may not be good at. That's a tough one, emotional. This is the one that a lot of people miss. So wanted to highlight that. All right. Other trends, you see this here, in the early 1900s. It's really simple. I produced it, and you bought whatever I produced. You ate what I cooked, so to speak. The world has changed now. Consumers call the shots. It's consumer-centric now. With non-GMOs, non-antibiotics, all the organic. The consumer drives this thing now, so we have to adhere to that there. The other thing that I want to talk about, and I think Harrison looked at, declining rural population and infrastructure. This goes back to that succession rate here I see, especially here in the Mississippi Delta here. When you take, and I saw the numbers, Dr. Birchman sent me this a few years ago, and I saw it in the paper. When you take Little Rock and you go pretty well the whole eastern Arkansas, outside of Craighead and Greene, every county has a long-term trend of losing population there. Well, that's a big issue, and now we have this deal, you may have heard this, food deserts. I call it food desert, educational deserts, and social deserts. It's meaning you don't have a lot of quality of something that's small. You got to go a long way and to do that. And Bert, I thought about 30 years ago, when you came up here, it was real simple. People from Harrisburg, I grew up, Mark Tree, Walnut Ridge, all these places, guess what? They commuted into Jonesboro for better dining, for hitting lessons, for dance lessons, for all these amenities. The game has changed now. They commute not from the tractor but back to the tractor. I bet when you sit here in April at sunup and see all the Z71 pickups heading out, That's where the whole structure, and has a huge implication on the Delta and everything. I always say, rural communities need agriculture, or agriculture needs rural communities, because that's a deal about will people come back to the farms, and if they don't have these amenities and these things here, and it's not just the farmers, it's people like us. That's the reason I basically modified our business model a few years ago, recognizing this trend of how we centralize it and do things. So that will shape agriculture here and farm structure going forward. The business model has changed here. In the early 1900s, it was a labor-centric model. Now it's an intellectual. When my father, early in his life, picked cotton south of Manila, the harder he worked, more he sweat, more money was in his hands. Now it is a thinking sport. It is an intellectual sport. Decisions drive profits or the lack thereof there. And basically what you see now is the new generation has a higher bar. And then basically if you look at a commercial producer, their job description is the same as mine. They're a CEO. They have full accountability and authority. They have the freedom to succeed, the freedom to fail there. Their key to success is just like mine. They're only good as the people they surround themselves with either make the decision or influence them in the decision. They to get a management team, and it may not be everybody's on the farm, they got a chief operating officer, but it's their accountant, it's their lawyers, it's their agronomist that advises them or makes decisions there. They need to have peer groups and advisory boards. Jennifer James, one of our customers, she went to TPAP. Go talk to her. She still has a peer group of ladies throughout the United States, and they meet periodically, just like I do CEOs, and talk about problem solving. So I always say the key to growth and success is who'd you meet, what'd you learn, how do you apply it? It's communication, it's stuff like this. So the point is, to make it in the future, the commercial producer has to develop a CEO mentality. All right. When you always say, what's the difference between those that make it and those that don't? These are the competencies and traits and skills that I've assessed in the past and as going forward here. Is that obviously you need strategic planning skills. I get this all the time. Large customers come in, or customer, hey, Greg, I want to talk to you, pick your brain, whatever. And we start about, give me some advice. I said, what's your end game? You got to know where you want to go. And I always say, in strategic planning, you become what you envision, plan for, and take action to. What you envision, plan for, and take action. Most people get the first two. It's the second one of taking action which goes into the discipline. As farmers get bigger, leadership is everything. You're leading people. The fact that you're a good tractor driver doesn't mean anything if you're farming 10,000 acres. The fact that I loaned money at one time and made loans is irrelevant to my job today. I got to find those and inspire those to be able to do those tasks in a group for an end deal. I always say leadership's not how good you are, it's how good you make the people around you. So developing leadership skills and discipline, and this is the big one here. Really a farmer is a margin manager. You got to know your cost. You got to have a marketing plan and know your market. You got to be disciplined. I've never seen anybody go broke selling at a profit. You got to be disciplined in your asset acquisitions. Just don't go for the next new tractor out, or somebody wants you to rent your land, it flatters you and whatever at the rental terms. You've got to be disciplined in that to make sure. Communication, you're dealing with people and negotiations. From flying services to lenders to agronomists to whatever, you got to be able to communicate. Dr. LaTour, this is what we talked about yesterday, the skills and things that we need our students to learn as they enter the workforce, and especially in farming there. Well, this is not your grandpa's farm. Technology is here. The tools have changed. Used to, it was the tools in the back of the box, was, some wrenches and hammers and, boots and everything. The new tools are on the front of the hood. It's a laptop, it's an iPad, it's a drone control. We're in a new area here. So we got to embrace and learn technology there. Obviously, the factors of farm management here are finance, production, and marketing. You don't have to be good at all of them. I get this question, should I major in agronomy? Should I major in agribusiness? It doesn't really. You need a little bit of everything. Know what you're good at. Have high emotional intelligence. Understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. Get other people to surround yourself with that. The last one is the key to all of it. I said, what makes the difference? And I've heard this, and all these years I've studied, why did this person make it and this person didn't? What kind of, and I was in San Francisco at a meeting, and this guy spoke, and I was like I knew it, but he articulated. It's mindset. The ones that make it and excel are the ones that they think of farming as a business first, lifestyle second. And they're committed to continuous improvement, as Danny Clydefitter said. Let me explain that. It's a farmer that had one of the best years he ever had, made a lot of money, cut the last row of soybeans, parked his combine on a Friday afternoon, gets at the shop on 7 o'clock on Monday morning and gets to work and say, how do I get better? It's Nick Saban that won national championships, and he's all celebrating. He's looking at his watch and says, get this over with. I got to go to work Monday. It's the Tiger Woods that won the first Masters in the greatest margin ever, walked by the press and said, told his caddy, meet me at the driving range at a problem with my swing. It's that idea, that mindset. And so that's to emphasize there. Those are the ones that we'll get to play in the future. All right. The next thing is sustaining profitability is everything. But keep in mind for business and anything, especially in agriculture, but profit sustainability is not just in the money you make, it's in the losses you prevent. Risk management has come paramount. A commercial producer as well as an ag lender, we make money by taking a risk. The key is to identify the risk, quantify the risk, and manage the risk. And this world is margins are thin, so don't get big deep because you can't make it up. All right, getting to the end of my comments, this is the one I get excited about. And for the young students here, young farmers, I want you to listen to this. This is one that I say I wish I was 22 instead of almost 62. When I look into the future and I see what's happening and the opportunities, you know, economists say 2050. That's out there, 30-ish. 9.3 billion people. All that growth is going to be in developing countries. It was India and China. I'm not sure India, but now Africa looks like it's going to have a lot of the population growth. Increased food demand by 40%. That says you chose the right industry fundamentally. Secondly, you're in the right region of the country to take advantage of that. Right here in the Mid-South. Because let me show you this slide here. Some of you may have seen this. This is the green slide. This is the most intense crop production in the United States here. Look there. There's the Central Valley of California. I was out there this time last year and got to tour of that. And that one valley is $42 billion of farm credit volume. That's how big that thing is. But look at the Red River Valley, the Willamette Valley. Here we go. Midwest, Red River Valley. This right here, this is what I call, Bert, the southern Ukraine. And the Mississippi River is our Black Sea. All that growth in those developing countries, we are strategically positioned to be an export business model there. We have multi-size operations, large scale. We have water. We can plant it. We can get it to the river. Now the qualifier is water in it. I know the last few years. But to the Gulf and to the bow of the ship to capitalize on that. So I always say if I started over and if I could say, where would I go again? Well, right here where I was born. The Mississippi Delta, and you look at the opportunity here, and I always say about land values and stuff. I love land. A few years ago, we had foreign investors coming in. They were buying land in here, and some of our people met with them. So why are you doing this? They studied all across the planet, including Ukraine and everything. Where do you want to go? They considered buying land in the Mississippi Delta. When you look at PE ratios, you look at bases, you look at scale, ability, infrastructure, all this stuff here. So you're in the right location here to take this. And Dean LaTour, look at Arkansas State. It's strategically located right here to provide the most key ingredient for success going forward is intellectual capital. So this is the bright thing, and this should excite everybody. Here's my conclusion to this. There's going to be tremendous opportunity in the future for agriculture. But those who will get to play and those who will not get to participate will come down to those that have the mindset and the skill sets and the approach of continuous improvement to be what I call the line, if you will, of agriculture and still to be on the other end. Anyway, that's my conclusion. Great to be back here at Arkansas State and look forward to questions later on.
Thank you very much, Greg. You can see why I invited Harrison and Greg to start us off today. They did a great job. I have a couple of announcements before we go to break. We do have refreshments. We'll have a 20-minute break in the lobby behind the auditorium, but we do have some information available to you. We have 5 information tables this year. Arkansas Soybean Promotion Board with Amy Lyman from the Arkansas Department of Agriculture. Southern Ag Today. This is a news information service by the Texas A&M Agricultural and Food Policy Center. Candace Foster is there, and Joe Outlaw, who was with us last year. Joe works with that center and sent her here today to be with us. So thank you, Joe Outlaw, for that. AgHeritage, A-State Heritage Sites, Ms. Penny Young, that includes the Johnny Cash Boyhood Home and the Tenant Farmers Museum in Dyess. They have information here. Arkansas Rice Federation, represented by Tisha Gribble, and then the College of Agriculture at A-State. We have ambassadors there with information about the college. So please stop by, visit with these information tables during the break. Come back here. We'll begin promptly at 10:20 with the second part of the general session. We're adjourned. Enjoy the refreshments provided courtesy of our generous sponsors. We have plenty of good seats here in the center section if you'd like to come on and move in and help us make room for everyone that's coming in. Greg, we need 5. Good morning, everyone. Please come in and take a seat. We're ready to begin the second half of the morning general session. Good morning, everyone. Please come in and take a seat. We're ready to start the second half of the morning general session. Well, good morning, everyone. This is the 30th A-State Agribusiness Conference. Hope you've enjoyed our morning thus far. We have 3 additional speakers and our panel discussion before we go to our noon luncheon. So our next topic involves a discussion of the sustainability issues and initiatives which are being developed by organizations in the rice and cotton sectors. Ms. Megan DeYoung is the head of transformation and business development with RiceTec Incorporated. During her career, she has advised several Fortune 1000 companies on how to develop and implement strategies that combine environmental action along with business value for the companies. Megan earned a bachelor's degree in sociology from Emory and master's degrees from both the University of Michigan Ross School of Business as well as the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. I met Megan last fall at a RiceTec event south of Jonesboro, and she's had an interesting career and working now with the rice industry. So Megan, this is her first visit to Arkansas State and the College of Agriculture. Thank you so much for joining us today and here to share information about sustainability issues in the rice industry. Megan DeYoung.
Thank you, Bert. Terrific. Hello, everybody. As you heard, before I talk about rice, I want to say I appreciate the previous speaker bringing up Michigan football. Not only am I a big Michigan fan, but we did just win the national championship, so go blue. Always happy to be able to say that. I know I'm an SEC country, but it's nice to be able to see some attention being paid outside to the rest of the Big Ten. So, as a person who works on transformation, I tend to not think about challenges. I tend to think about opportunities and how can we make something out of something that seems challenging and complex. It's kind of my forte. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about rice, and for those of you who are familiar with RiceTec, you might have heard these statistics before, but if you are a little less familiar with us or haven't met us at all, let me just spend a minute talking about who we are. We are the only seed company focused on rice, and with that, we feel a responsibility in terms of creating a sustainable rice agriculture that creates more value for farmers, consumers, and the planet, and we do that through our own innovation. And that started back when we were founded in 1988 here in Texas, and we really were working on our first hybrid cross. Since then, we've not only expanded into Mercosur and India, as well as have an export business, but that we also have released hybrids, multiple hybrids at this point, and I know many of you in the room that are growing rice are growing with some of our seed, and we appreciate that. And also that we've released the first herbicide-tolerant trait more than 10 years ago, actually. And so we've been working with generations of farmers to help them improve their own livelihoods and their farming practices and to make those more sustainable at the same time. So as I said, we are a global company, and I know farming ultimately is local, but we think local and we think global as well at the same time. So we have a combination of different kind of core businesses and core regions that we work in, so the United States being the one we've been working in the longest, but also with Mercosur and India. And within those, we have a global R&D program that shares resources and learnings across our different regions, but also then breeds and works on R&D innovation for those particular local conditions, even down to sort of differences within states and within provinces. We also do we do production and we do commercial sales in those regions, and then we have an export business as well. And so as we think about being a global company, we think a lot about different issues that affect farming and agriculture, and of course, climate change is one of those that's been talked about for a while. It's not a new topic, but we're trying to think about it from the perspective more specifically about what RiceTec can do to assist farmers in tackling this topic. So just to set the stage here, when you think about all of the greenhouse gas emissions, totally we release 55 billion tons of CO2 equivalent into the air. Of that, actually methane is almost 1/5 of that. And we've been hearing more a few years ago about kind of the methane coming from cows and the dairy industry, but we actually think that we're going to find that rice is going to be increasingly under this microscope as people understand that the impact that rice growing has on methane. And the reason that we also think about methane, and we talk about methane specifically as that particular greenhouse gas, is because if you look at 100 years, the greenhouse the warming potential of that particular gas, of methane, is 28 times stronger than it is of CO2. So it may be a smaller percentage overall, but it has a long-lasting impact and obviously not a particularly positive one. So when we look more specifically here at the impacts, we know that agriculture is actually the #1 contributor to methane production in the world. And so that's at 43%, and then of that, 10% is coming from rice alone. So ultimately what that means is that 4% of the methane released into the air comes from rice farming. And that's something we very much want to pay attention to because it has long-term effects on our ultimately ability to farm, but also on other things around human health. So one of the things that's also understood is that water management practices do have an impact on whether there is more or less methane released. You know, rice can be quite a water-intensive crop to grow, but what isn't necessarily always clear is exactly why is that. And so trying to explain this as sort of coming from a business perspective, I think kind of like, how can I simplify this? We think about it from the idea that ultimately kind of more water equals more methane. So when you've got water on the field, basically the oxygen can't reach the soil. And when that lack of oxygen is the situation, you have an anaerobic fermentation, and that's creating methane. And then the methane is actually going from the soil into the air through the plant itself. And what we'll see here on the next few slides is that, well, we don't exactly understand exactly why, but the different plants have different impacts in terms of how much methane is ultimately released. So the more we can reduce the water that's used, that's a kind of more obvious opportunity, the more we can reduce the methane that is being emitted into the air. So direct-seeded rice is something that is very common already in the United States as well as in Europe and South America. And when we look at other parts of the world, especially Southeast Asia, where a lot of rice is actually grown, we see transplanted rice and continuous flooding. So moving to direct-seeded rice is a very big opportunity to actually reduce that water that is used and therefore have a positive impact on methane. And ultimately changing your water management practices, which several of you know because you are doing this or thinking about doing this or have done this, can also have an impact. And so this data comes from a few studies, including from one by USDA, and we appreciate the ability to share this data. Some of you might have seen some of this last week as well. But when you look at the water management practices, and it's okay that you can't read every word on this slide because the bars kind of tell the story, which is if you look at continuous flooding versus all AWD or row rice, what you can see is that the bars ultimately go down. So what we're seeing there is just by changing your water management practice, the amount of methane that's being produced is decreased. What we also see on this slide is that when you're looking at what kind of seed you're planting, a hybrid or a variety, that also has an impact. So in the same system, so if you take the top two graphs, and so continuous flooding as an example, the same system, you plant a hybrid and you plant a variety, what you see is that the hybrid actually is creating less global warming potential than the variety. So also the seed that you're planting has an impact. So if you can combine the seed and the water management practice, you kind of get a double bonus. It doesn't exactly multiply, 1 + 1 = 2, but you do see that in some combination you can have an influence in terms of reducing from somewhere between roughly 45 to 65% of the global warming potential from rice production. So the other thing we think about is that all hybrids, we don't exactly know why, but all hybrids are not having the same amount of reduction for methane. So hybrids, as many of you know, of course, having done this, when you are looking at growing it, it actually produces still a very positive yield and good quality. And so that hybrid also, if you are in an environment where you're using less water, sometimes on purpose, like an AWD, or sometimes not on purpose because you've got some sort of heat stress happening, that hybrid is going to kind of hold up a little bit better. So you can still look at that profitability around rice growing. What you can also see with RiceTec hybrids is that we've seen that the RiceTec hybrids also have an impact, the ability to reduce the global warming potential and the water use even more so than other hybrids. Again, we don't exactly know why. We're very curious to help understand why and hoping that some of the scientists out there doing this research can assist us with that because there's, of course, long-term potential with how could we continue to develop and grow seed and breed seed and produce seed that could have even better effects if we know exactly what's driving that, whether it's the root mass or whether it's the size of the plant or exactly what it is. So what is RiceTec doing with all of this information? Well, this slide is sort of schematic, and it makes it sound, I'll admit, that it's all more thought out and defined than it really is, because this space is still new. But what we are doing is we're looking at this idea of how do we work directly with farmers, having that relationship with so many farmers here in the United States, and also having relationships with farmers in India and Mercosur. How do we actually provide them with opportunity to choose how they would like to participate in these various programs? And so there's talk out there about carbon offset programs. So that's the idea of I've done these practices, or especially if I can prove that we've reduced, actually had some performance improvements in terms of carbon emissions, then you can have that marketed separate from the grain. Offsets, you can look at having that attached to the grain, and there's a lot of consumer products good companies out there that are looking at buying that grain and then kind of contributing, counting up the environmental impact as part of meeting their own goals. And then there's a longer term conversation we had on how do you attach and certify that grain in a way that it can travel, and it's not necessarily a CPG company, it can go to other places. So ultimately, all of those have different mechanisms for creating some sort of dollar for the farmer, but that is the ultimate goal for RiceTec, is how do we help you as farmers create more value per your acre through these practices that you're either already doing or considering doing, in addition to, of course, the value you're getting from growing rice in the first place. So some of you might be sitting there and thinking, I've heard this before. Why is this different? And what I'll say is, we're going to acknowledge that it is not a complete repeatable business yet, that there is a lot of noise, as we say, out there. There are different practices that different companies are asking you to do. There are different kind of standards. There's different data to collect. There's a lot of noise. Well, what's going to last? What's not going to last? How are these grants going to affect the long-term viability of a market? And to be honest, we don't exactly know. If we did, we would absolutely tell everybody, but we're figuring it out right alongside with you. So we're doing that in part by looking at a couple pilots, small pilots that we've been doing last year and this year, and also actually scaling from pilot to commercial in our India business to really work with farmers and try out a couple different options that see what works best for them. And probably at the end of the day, different farmers will want and need different things. We also recognize where we have a role to play. So RiceTec being a seed company, we have obviously a huge role to play in that creation of that hybrid seed that has so much opportunity to reduce methane emissions, and we're looking at how we continue with that. But we also are looking at the fact that at the end of the day, once we sell the seed, we know a lot about that, but we're not carbon experts ourselves, and we're not offset experts, and we're not the CPG company. So we are looking at how we partner and have multiple partners in order to be able to help go through this noise and try to make a little bit more sense of it. So all of this is at the end to basically keep our focus on the farmer and figure out how we can help them create more value per acre. So we're taking this challenge of carbon and methane and the enormous amount, that 4% that our industry creates, and trying to figure out ways to reduce that number around the world. So with that, I will close, and I think we're going to have an opportunity for questions later, and maybe I got us a little bit more back on time. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. So pleased to have you here for your first visit to the A-State Agribusiness Conference, and she'll participate in the morning discussion session later. Our next presenter is Chad Brewer, also a first-time speaker at our conference. Chad is Assistant Director for the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol and leads the Climate Smart Cotton Program for the Trust Protocol. He's a cotton agronomist, 15 years of experience working with cotton and the cotton ecosystem, previously held positions in private industry, and earned his doctorate in weed ecology from the University of Arkansas. First time to be here, Chad Brewer. Thank you for coming.
Well, this is actually fantastic. So what we left out of my bio when we sent it was like, this is probably my second or third time being at the conference, because actually A-State's my alma mater. I was in the College of Agriculture there for about 5 years, trying to work on a 4-year degree. We had a real good time. Yeah, we left that part out. And the reason Bert didn't remember is because I avoided that class like the plague. Had I not been having such a good time, maybe I could have handled it, but you know, math is hard. So I did start my career as a cotton agronomist, so I'm much more comfortable being out in the field, digging in the dirt and looking for bugs and weeds than what I am being up here presenting in front of this large crowd. So bear with me. I do now work for the National Cotton Council. In January, I took a role as the Director of Technical Services for the Council. But over the course of the past year, I spent all my time working with the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. Throughout this presentation, you'll see that QR code up there. You can scan those, and it'll take you to various websites and more reference material as we go through it. I wanted to begin, and really Mr. Coble and even Mr. DeYoung set this presentation up just on a tee for me. So if I could quote Mr. Coble a little bit. Agriculture is not immune to the free market. We are now in a consumer-centric versus a producer-centric environment. The key to success is to stay ahead of the pack, and this is my favorite one, markets rationalize to an equilibrium. Now, I avoided Dr. Greenwalt's class like the plague, but I think this means, in cotton farming terms, every premium eventually turns into a discount. And so as he spoke about that, I thought, well, man, that's very relevant for what I'm fixing to talk about. I also want to say, which button do we do? Oh, here we go. That at the National Cotton Council, we are 100% for the U.S. cotton farmer. So as we begin to talk about sustainability, I want you to know that we're for the farmers, but sustainability is extremely important to the end users of your cotton. I went and just pulled some random slides around from off the internet, and so beginning about 6 years ago, 36 major apparel brands pledged to achieve sustainable cotton by 2025. That, if you hadn't noticed, that date's creeping up pretty quick. Then you talk about, there's another thing called a science-based target initiative. You may hear them referred to as SBTI goals. These are actual goals set by the apparel brands, this one by Adidas. Did you know that's how you say it? I didn't. They say it Adidas. I always called it Adidas, but I'm from Northeast Arkansas, so what do I know? This is where they set the targets about the Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions that Mr. DeYoung was talking about. So Scope 3 is the carbon emissions that are directly influencing the supply chain. So they're counting the carbon emissions from your cotton field all the way to the T-shirt or pair of shoes that they're selling. And so they commit to things like reducing their greenhouse Scope 3 emissions by 30% by a date in the future. American Eagle has said, you know, essentially the same thing. They're going to reduce their carbon emissions by a certain percent by some time in the future. Levi Strauss, I might have worn a pair of 501s once or twice in my day, and they have said the same thing. They're going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, their Scope 3 emissions by a certain percentage at some point they've set in the future. And so you may be asking yourself, well, why in the world would these companies be making these setting these sustainability goals? What's going on? Well, I used to work for a multinational seed and trait company, and I can tell you right now that shareholders have a huge influence in the direction of a company. These large companies, like we just talked about, have multiple have large boards, and then some of them have activist shareholders. So you see things like what Levi Strauss has an entire section on their website dedicated to sustainability. Gap, which owns Old Navy, Gap, Banana Republic, Athleta, They have said, hey, we're going to source 100% sustainable cotton by 2030, so 5 years from now. They're about 15% today. So you can begin to see the trajectory and the trend that these end users of your cotton are setting. So what's it mean to us? What it means is like we want to be on this list right here. So there's a group that I didn't even know about this whole thing existed until I got into the Cotton Trust Protocol, but there's a group called the Textile Exchange, and it's made up of broad stakeholders from all across the apparel industry. And they essentially created this list called the Preferred Fiber and Material Matrix. It's a long way of saying this is a preferred sourcing list, right? So on this list, they rate things like cotton, synthetics, MMCF, so that's man-made cellulosic fibers, flax, and wool. And so they rate these fibers on several different environmental categories. So things like climate, water, biodiversity, land use. You can read them across the slide, and they give each one of these a 0 to a 4 score. And so they take programs like the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, and they give them a 0 to 4 score on each one of those sections. They take things like Better Cotton, give them a 0 to 4 score. They take things like Australia's BMP, and they say 0 to 4 on each one of those sections. What do you think that they do for cotton that's not in any program? It makes what I would have made in Bert's class, straight zeros all the way across. So the point being, if you want to be on the preferred fiber matrix, if you want your cotton to be on the preferred fiber matrix, you need to get in some type of sustainability program. This is another slide from that textile exchange. They talk about how cotton is, in 22% of the fibers across, is 22% of the fibers used across the apparel industry, but then they also say something like cotton production comes with its challenges. Now, if you can read the fine print, you'll start to see words like organic and regenerative and recycled. You'll see things like they're concerned about pesticide use. They're concerned about synthetic fertilizer, soil health, water, and biodiversity. That's what they're listing out as concerns about cotton. Now, look, I'm from the National Cotton Council, spent all my life working with cotton, 15 years of my life working with cotton farmers. So I understand that the U.S. cotton is the most sustainably produced cotton in the world, but guess what? If you don't write it down, I can't prove it happened. So the last one I'll mention is climate change, and that's where the Scope 3 emissions really matter. That's why the apparel companies have included those Scope 3 reduction targets. So you notice about words like recycled. So what's recycled cotton? Well, you take a pair of blue jeans, you shred it up, and you use it for insulation. That's Blue Jeans Go Green. I believe that was by Cotton Incorporated. That's a great example of a use for recycled cotton. Organic cotton, you know what that is. You grow it without synthetic herbicide, or without many synthetic herbicides and synthetic fertilizer. Not a lot of it grown in the United States. But then you notice the last word, and this is where the shift has gone in their language. It's gone from sustainability or sustainable cotton to regenerative cotton. So what is regenerative cotton? So I went to Cotton Inc., and that's one of that QR codes there, so you can go see it for yourself. Cotton Today says regenerative agriculture in general is a systems-based approach. And essentially what it boils down to minimizing soil disturbance. There's really no definition for regenerative ag, but there's 5 agreed upon principles, generally agreed upon principles. Minimizing soil disturbance, maintaining living roots in the soil year-round, cover bare soil, maximize diversity in your crops, your soil microbes, and even pollinators, and integrate livestock where feasible. And I was like, what in the world? What are y'all talking about? But when you boil all that down, what they're talking about is increasing soil carbon. And I had to explain this to a land manager one time about soil carbon. He's like, well, what are we talking about? I said, well, you read a soil test, right? He goes, yeah. I said, well, we're talking about increasing the organic matter percentage. And all of a sudden, light bulb comes on. He goes, I got it. I got it. I know what we're talking about. And so when you see the organic matter percentage goes up in your soil test, you're increasing your soil carbon, and guess what? You're also increasing what folks call your soil health. So really all these things boil down to increasing your soil organic matter content. And that's, a way to put it that an old dirt rubbing agronomist could understand it. So when we talk about sustainability, regenerative ag, they're talking about yield stability. That's one of the benefits of it. So we're taking on a systems approach to controlling weeds, water, and then, I grew a little bit of cotton, or helped some folks grow some cotton up here in northeast Arkansas, and that also means managing erosion, specifically wind erosion up here. So how do we do it? So you take these 5 principles and we start breaking it down, like how are we going to implement regenerative ag? Well, minimize your soil disturbance, that's no-till, reduce-till, strip-till, right? Maintain living roots, that's simply we're going to plant a cover crop, have something growing on that ground year-round. Crop rotation definitely qualifies for maximizing your diversity. Corn, cotton rotation, phenomenal. Cotton, peanuts, it kind of gets problematic with that minimum soil disturbance, but hey, there's a lot of rotation benefits to cotton and peanuts. And then integrate livestock where possible. I've actually seen guys do fall and winter feeder calves. So they plant a cover crop, then graze feeder calves on it, sell them in the spring, burn down, and plant a cotton crop. It is possible, although it does come with some drawbacks. So is this without extra inputs? Nope. You're going to have the right equipment. So row cleaners, coulters, maybe even special closing wheels on your planter. Cover crop, obviously that's an extra expense that you didn't have before. And then what in the world? I left the cattle business in order to come down here and grow crops. And now I've got to get back into it. And I tell you what, that is a daunting task for anybody, but if you've never had any experience with it, it can be somewhat terrifying. So how we do it? I think you start slow on your own land. Land you own, you've got a little more margin potential. You can afford to take a little more risk. Start small and start with things that you can do. So cover crops, you could probably manage to do a cover crop. Other thing is consult other innovators. We're not the first ones to think of this. And so there's a large network of growers out there that have already done this in our area and that can actually benefit from their experience. And then talking about risk, there are programs that will help you de-risk this new venture. So, EQIP programs from the NRCS is one option. And then as we talked about the Climate Smart Commodities Grant, which is a funding opportunity by the USDA, there are over 140 of them out there today. There is one specifically for cotton that'll help cover some of the cost of the cover crops and no-till, and even helping you develop a nutrient management plan. So the last thing I'll say is don't be scared to fail and give yourself a little bit of time to get it figured out. I've got way more slides than what we can do, but here at the last thing I'll mention to you is the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol was funded by the National Cotton Council and made for cotton farmers. Its mission is to become the standard for U.S. cotton sustainability. We want to be the on-ramp to your sustainability journey. We take your farm-level data through your input and then stack it on top of traceability through a supply chain. So we have the ability to trace the cotton purchase from the warehouse, from the merchandiser, all the way through the spinner and the different production facilities scattered all throughout the world, and end up at the end with the apparel brand and retailer. So you stack sustainability and traceability on top of each other, and you actually got a really pretty good program to offer the apparel brands and retailers. So the member benefits are tremendous for the producers, but the main one being that this is the goal of the protocol is to maintain open markets for the U.S. cotton on a global stage. I mentioned that Climate Smart program, which will help de-risk the adoption of some of these practices. It's a 5-year program. We started in May of 2023. It's got $90 million in it. $61 million is dedicated to producers to incentivize those practice changes, cover crops, no-till, and your nutrient management. There's 7 partners across the U.S. that we're working with, and then 3 different program levels. This is a list of our partners. You'll see folks like Cotton Incorporated, Soil Health Institute, several universities, and then, of course, Cotton International, or Cotton USA, which is our international arm of the Cotton Council, and then AgriCenter. The goal of this program is to provide you with the technical and financial assistance to help adoption of these practices. It's kind of like a pilot program that you can run on your farm in order to, quote, dip your toe into this sustainability journey. So we have a goal of advancing the adoption of these practices. Over 1.2 million acres of U.S. cotton, producing about 4.2 million bales, which that's not going to be a problem. But one of the things we're developing is a Scope 3 carbon market, where we're going to have a goal to sell 1.14 million metric tons of carbon to apparel brands and retailers. So this is where we're headed. I think that this is where the cotton industry, the ag industry is headed, and we definitely want you all to be a part of it. The program summary, we could go through that, be happy to discuss this at any time with y'all. Basically, there's 3 levels coming in to the protocol, adopting some practices and selling some carbon. So, without any further ado, if you have any questions, there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. We also have a session this afternoon after lunch.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you, Bert.
Thank you very much, Chad. Chad and Megan will also participate in the discussion session later this morning, as well as the afternoon sessions in the rice and cotton concurrent sessions. So let's move to our last major presentation this morning. As many of you know who are knowledgeable about farm policy, the latest farm bill was passed in 2018. Harrison mentioned it expired for the 2023 crop. We were working on a new farm bill last year without success. Or Congress was, and Congress was unable to advance a new bill, but they did pass an extension of the 2018 bill, which continues the provisions of that legislation through the 2024 crop through this year. Our next presenter, Keith Coble, originally I expected him to talk about implementation of the new farm bill or issues related with that, but of course we have a different situation. So Dr. Keith Coble will discuss current economic and political situation, how it influences our policy process and our farm bill debate. He's the Vice President of the Mississippi State University Division of Agriculture, Forestry, and Veterinary Medicine. Also has been a professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics there, where his research focused on farm policy, risk management, and crop insurance. During the 2014 Farm Bill debate, Keith was chief economist for former U.S. Senator Thad Cochran and the minority leadership of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Keith is a native of Mountain Grove, Missouri, which is only about 3 hours northwest of Jonesboro. He earned bachelor's and master's degrees in ag education at University of Missouri, and then his PhD in ag economics at Texas A&M. Keith, I appreciate you rushing back from the Southern Ag Economics Association convention in Atlanta. I should mention that 4 students and I visited Mississippi State earlier in January. They had an Ag Outlook conference. We attended that. They had a good program and offered us great hospitality there. I hope we're doing the same, Keith. Welcome to Arkansas State University.
Thank you, Bert. It is a pleasure to be here. As most all of you have heard, Bert is a Mississippi State PhD. We're so proud of him. We appreciate him. He's one of the first people that I met of our alumni and has become a great friend over the years. It is a bit of a challenge to talk about farm policy right now because everything's up in the air. I will give you some opinions. I will not give you any guarantees of anything much that I tell you today. But it is an honor to be here. I have to tease, an A-State grad, Hunter Byram, is now working in the University of Arkansas Extension System. Hunter works on farm policy and crop insurance related, risk related issues, just got started. So if you have any really hard questions for me today, Hunter will stand up and answer for me, okay? Just a couple of things. I have really enjoyed being here this morning, as I expected, in terms of some of the things that the previous speakers have said. I spent many years teaching our farm policy class at Mississippi State University. And one of the things that surprised me is the longer I taught it, the longer I thought about it, the more that I came to the conclusion that technological change drives most of the policy debates that we have, okay? It was because farming systems have changed, technology has changed. When you listen to Harrison, when you listen to Greg this morning, technology creates these dilemmas that we have to sort through, okay? That is a key issue. Well, what drives technological change? Research. And we'll talk a little bit about research today and some of the things that I think we need to be thinking about. I look at ag autonomy and and the labor issue that we're talking about. I really believe in a lot of cases that we are going to solve a lot of the labor issues with technology. That's why we at Mississippi State created an Ag Autonomy Institute several months ago, focusing on how do we move forward with equipment, with machines that do not have to have an operator. This is one of the big factors going forward. I think also one thing that has not been mentioned so far today is that data science, artificial intelligence and things like that are going to make a big difference in the way we do things, but there are going to be many instances where it's oversold. We're going to be sorting through what really works from what doesn't work. And some people are going to buy into some great ideas that don't work, but they were sold as the solution. And we have spent many years trying to figure out where we can and where we cannot use data science in agriculture, and we're working on that at Mississippi State as well. One of the things that I always think about when I come up here, Bert, is that if you really, and I'm going to try to do this or get somebody else to do it for me, but if you really think about the Mississippi, lower Mississippi River Delta, you think about the Arkansas side of the river, the Mississippi side of the river, the West Tennessee, the Boot Heel of Missouri, and you may want to go bigger than that. This is a powerhouse agricultural region, but it doesn't give it the recognition it deserves because it's scattered across 3 or 4 states. And a few years ago, a leading official of the NOAA came to Mississippi State University. He had a map of the fertile soil regions of the world. And there's not that much of it. And this morning at breakfast, we were talking about solar farms and things like that. And that's one of the things that I worry about is as we try to figure our way forward in terms of what are we going to use these most fertile soils for. And one of the advantages that I think about compared to the western half of the United States is that we have more water than they do. I went to a conference at Boise, Idaho a few years ago, and one of the things that I ran into is they had a session. It was irrigation was the topic. Every speaker was a lawyer. Huh? Harrison? You're done when every speaker on the topic is a lawyer. I mean, you're just fighting over scraps at that point. And that's what they were doing in Boise, Idaho. We have the potential to manage our water in a way that is sustainable. And that's not true where my uncle and aunt lived in the Central Valley of California for so many years. Well, so let me begin. Let's talk about timeline. When are we going to get a farm bill? Well, Bert already alluded to this. The first thing we've got to recognize is 2024 is an election year. It's going to be a short legislative cycle. They're not going to be there pushing things. And there's just not that much time. One of the things that struck me when I went to work in the Senate is how the process in the Senate takes a lot of time, and there's just not a lot of time going to be there on the floor. The other thing is the appropriations process is all jammed up, and things are, until the appropriations process gets done, I don't think we're going to get serious attention to the Farm Bill. There'll be some effort. Senator Stabenow, who was the chair of the Senate Ag Committee when I was working for Senator Cochran, is trying to retire. And one of the things that I think might help speed this process along is that I think Senator Stabenow and the majority Democrats would like to give her this win as she goes out the door. So we've either got to move extremely rapidly this spring. We might be able to do it in a lame duck session after the election. But I think going against that as well, when you pay attention to the political prognosticators who talk about who's going to control the House and Senate, I think increasingly there is a sense among Democrats that they have a chance to take control of the House. I think there's a sense among the Republicans in the Senate that they may have a chance of taking control of the House. So at some point, some people are going to say, you know what, if we drag our feet a little longer, we're going to be in control. And so the minorities may not have all the incentives that they normally would. And so I think there's a chance there that that may happen and that we may be doing another extension. Okay, let's talk about the political process a little bit. I lived this. Those of you that follow the policy process closely know that Senator Cochran in 2013 was not the ranking Republican, Pat Roberts was, but Senator Cochran had seniority, and Southern groups came to Senator Cochran and said, we need you to outrank Senator Roberts and protect the Southern farm policies, and Senator Cochran did. And so that's the reason I went up there, because he scrambled to put a team together, and my boss called me and said, wouldn't you like to go to D.C. on a sabbatical? Well, it turned into being the chief economist of the minority staff there for a while, which was a great opportunity. But I think one of the things that we've got to recognize right now is that there's a lack of clear majority. They're very close in both houses. So the Republicans in the House have the thinnest of thin control of the majority. And they're a fractious bunch anyway, so they are really struggling to try to move forward. I think the other thing that we see is that the Trump administration and the Biden administration have both used CCC funds in fairly novel ways and with their agenda. Obviously, with the Trump administration, it had to do with trade payments in a lot of cases. And with the Biden administration, a lot of it has to do with conservation. Not surprising given the priorities of those two administrations. But we've spent CCC funds in some fairly unique ways in the past few years. Now, this is an old diagram. The maroon boxes here, this is a diagram that I have seen for years. Bert, you've seen this. I think Dave Swiker talked about this diagram, the iron triangle of ag policy. Well, I think that is an obsolete artifact today. It used to be the farm groups and the legislative branch, the ag committees, and the administration got together and they wrote the Farm Bill. And it wasn't with a lot of other people in the room. And so you had people who had worked on the Hill, on the Ag Committee, go over to USDA, or be in a farm group, and everybody knew each other. They were old friends. They had argued and fought through policy in the past, and it was kind of a little clique. But other people want to have a piece and a say of the Farm Bill today. Obviously, the Freedom Caucus and their friends that are trying to reduce the size of government, reduce federal spending in a very significant way, are champions in a lot of cases for splitting the Farm Bill, the nutrition title, from the farm programs, and are generally not in favor of spending more money on farm programs of any type, especially some. You also have the environmental groups. And when I went up there in 2013, what I saw was there are hundreds of environmental groups. They are not monolithic. They have lots of variations. Some are much more cordial with agriculture than others, but they intend to influence this bill, okay? And they intend to, in particular, influence Title II of the bill and any other areas that they can. The other element that I think is really important is that you have members of the Senate Ag Committee now who are very focused not on farm policy, but they're on nutrition policy. And there are kind of two subgroups here that I refer to as the foodies, okay, that like local, they like organic, they like some of the attributes that we've been talking about this morning, and they are powerful, and they're becoming more powerful with every farm bill. And so this is a situation where we have to reckon with that. And I think the last two presentations, we would have not had those two presentations 20 years ago. We wouldn't have had them because these groups had not arisen to push sustainability, organic, and all regenerative, all these terminologies that we're using today are because of these influences that have come in, and the environmental groups as well. And of course, we've got the traditional SNAP supporters. Representative McGovern has led that group in my mind for many years, but the SNAP programs for the poor have grown, and I've got a slide in a minute that's going to show you about that. But all I really am trying to say is it is not getting simpler to pass a farm bill. And when Harrison asks, are we someday not going to have farm bills? I think that's a possibility. I really do. And so just keep in mind all these forces that are coming into play. I'm sure my friend John Newton with the Senate Ag Committee, working for Senator Bozeman, put this together. But you see, because of changes that have been made in the SNAP program, it has grown now to more than 80% of the cost of the Farm Bill as compared to what the previous Farm Bill was. It dwarfs everything else. I think one of the things that you don't hear about a lot is that there is going to be a lot of backroom debate about the recalculation and updating of SNAP rules, because that is in part what led to this increase in SNAP cost. You see the other slices of the pie. Commodity programs are 4.5% of that bill. Crop insurance is 6.7%. And so you have these pieces that are out there that a lot of you in this room are very interested in and say, how can it be such a small piece? But that is the reality of where we're at today. Talking about Title I, ARC and PLC, and we did a lot of work in the 2014 bill to create these programs and modernize them. The thing that, how times change, working for Senator Cochran, the reference prices that we got on PLC in 2013, to be honest, when we negotiated those reference prices, we went to a meeting come back to the office, and we got no pushback. I had CBO scores from a lot of different levels. The other side did not push back on our scores for peanuts, rice. We had a lot of conversations about cotton. At that point, Senator Stabenow was not a big fan of stacks, which she is now. And so anyway, the regional preferences come into play, the southern crops versus the Midwest crops. That really is a part of it. In a lot of ways, ARC, the county triggered ARC program in Title I, and SEO and stacks in Title 11, the crop insurance program, function similarly. I will talk about in just a second more about that. The Stabenow proposal is the latest kind of move to get the Farm Bill conversation started. She has pushed for stacks for all. I'm going to show you a subsidy chart here in a second, which will explain, I think, part of the reason for that. But the thing that you don't hear so much in this conversation about a stacks-like model for all the commodities is about base versus planted acres. And so there are some producers in this room that know that they have base in something other than what they're planting. And there are people that are going to be very strongly preferring to maintain their base because financially it's beneficial to do so relative to moving to something on planted acres. This is a map, actually, Will Maples of our Ag Econ department produced this, and I know it's rather small here, but basically what this shows is that we are not planting up to our full cotton basin a lot in this region. And if you look at soybeans, we're overplanting relative to our base. And so this is part of the conversation. And do they find some path forward where there's a possibility of base updating, whether there's a possibility of partial or giving people choices, I think is going to be part of the conversation here. Harrison, you talked about the WTO and how much that was a concern 30 years ago. I know people that made their careers working on WTO-related issues. The stacks that came out of WTO, basically, does anybody care about WTO anymore? We don't hear about that. And I can remember when I was up there a decade ago and we were talking about base versus planted. And Senator Roberts from Kansas was just adamant that we not go to a planted acre Title I program. And so I think some of these conversations are going to be difficult for them to resolve to get us to a farm bill. In graduate school, Texas A&M, I got interested in crop insurance. Not because I wanted to be in the middle of the policy debate. I got interested in it because I grew up on a farm in south central Missouri. When there was a drought, our rocky, poor soils did not do well. And I thought that the uncertainty about agriculture and the weather was such an important thing that I wanted to do research on it. And so I went there. And then just as I start working on crop insurance, it becomes a mainstay of foreign policy in much of the country. And still today, that approach to risk protection for farmers, the program has changed, it has grown, it has gotten bigger, it has gotten more subsidized than it was when I started working on it. It's also improved in a lot of respects, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is a graph that I show quite frequently. One thing is that over the years I've gotten questions a lot about, because I did yield and insurance risks, that people would say, well, talk to Keith Coble about climate change. So you would think that climate change would be causing the losses in crop insurance to go up and the rates to go up. That's not what's happening. And I'm not a climate change denier. But I think what we've got to realize is that in dealing with extreme weather and all those things. Over the years, we have gotten more people into the crop insurance program. Over the years, we have improved the rating of the crop insurance program, which when I started looking at it was pretty terrible, okay? They've gotten far, far more sophisticated over time. We have improved our productivity, and this is one of the things when people start talking about climate change. We've got better seed varieties, we're using better farming techniques, and so all these things come together. And what we see is that the crop insurance program, in general, the rates are going down. Now, let me separate out different crops. I know the legend may be difficult for you to see, but this is by commodity, and you see that the loss ratios have come down on all the major commodities over time, which should translate into lower rates for you. Now, one thing that I will say about crop insurance rates. What is the number one thing that drives the rates for your crop in your county? It is the experience of you and your neighbors growing the same crop in your county. The argument that you in Arkansas are paying for the losses in Texas is not true. Now, if your neighbor is having a lot of losses, that could perfect you foundly. And so that's one of the things that we need to understand. But in general, this is what's going on with the crop insurance program. The other thing, if we've got anybody involved in livestock in here, one of the things that we see is that we have finally gotten some livestock programs that farmers are taking up. I think crop insurance agents are essential to that, and you're seeing more and more interest in the livestock insurance products than we've had in the past. Now, what does crop insurance subsidy mean? Let's assume that the actuaries at the USDA Risk Management Agency think that your fair price in the long run, the losses on your acre are going to be $10 per year. Okay, that's then their actuarially fair rate. Okay, so if they think that the losses in the long run on your acre are going to be $10 a year, and you get 60% subsidy, then you're going to pay $4 year in, year out. And we have now, when I first started looking at crop insurance, the subsidy was about 30% in a lot of cases. Now we've got some products, and this is going to be a very big part of the discussion as we get into this stacks conversation with Senator Stabenow, is that stacks has 80% subsidy. Fundamentally, stacks and SCO are almost identical products. The difference is the amount of subsidy on those products. So if RMA thinks that the actuarially fair rate for a stacks product for you is $10, then you're going to pay $2. Okay? Now, do those actuaries make mistakes? Absolutely. It is hard to rate yield risk. I have a friend who is one of the leading actuaries in the casualty and actuarial industry who came and helped do a study and a review of the crop insurance rating, and she said, this is the hardest stuff in the world I've ever looked at. I thought it was like hurricane insurance, but it's worse because you have so much variation in soils, you have so much variation in weather, you have so much variation in production practices that this is a really hard thing to do, okay? You see the participation in stacks versus SCO. We really not penetrated the market a great deal. This prohibition of having SCO and stacks against the other programs is a bit of a challenge, and so that's part of the conversation that they're in now. Now, I'm going to change subjects on you, but this is now my pet topic, and that is agricultural research. The best studies that we've got say that there's a 20-to-1 benefit for ag research. This is the part of the Farm Bill, the research title that nobody talks about, except university administrators like me. So I'm going to bore you for a couple minutes on this. I went to China 12 years ago and spoke at an international conference and met a Purdue grad who was Chinese, had gone back home, and he didn't say this with any kind of gloating or anything. He just said, the policy of the Chinese government is to build 50 Purdue universities in the next 10 years. And I was stunned. Because what I saw at that time is they had really bright assistant professors, most of them trained in other countries, and their senior faculty at their universities were not good at all. And I saw that at the conference that I was at. Now, having said that, this is Mississippi data. I think it would look very much the same. Let's use an example here in the United States. I moved to Mississippi in 1997, and one of the first impressions that I had in the summer of 1998 is the way we grow soybeans down here is really risky. We planted them late, they got up about this high, and then it turned hot, and they struggled. And the work that was done in Arkansas and Mississippi to change to varieties in a production system to get those beans in the ground earlier, short season varieties, absolutely a game changer. And you look, we have doubled Mississippi soybean yields in 20 years. And I think that would be true in Arkansas as well. Research makes a difference. That makes you more competitive with Illinois. That makes you more competitive with Brazil. It matters. Okay, now, I know that in Mississippi, we've been talking about foreign ownership of ag land. In Arkansas, you've been talking about foreign ownership of ag land. I want to talk to you about the research output of China versus the United States. This is a plot, comes out of an abstracting database that our university subscribes to. It's called Scopus. I searched for one word, soybeans. This is, the blue line represents the number of articles written by US scientists, and the red line is the number of articles written by Chinese scientists. It maps and confirms what that young Chinese scientist was telling me 12 years ago. They don't intend to buy as many soybeans from us 20 years from now as they are buying today. It's their policy. We better pay attention to the research competition with other countries. All my career, I have had people come from other countries to the United States and look at our research system and look at our extension systems and say, oh, I wish we had this in our country. Well, some of those folks are beginning to catch up with us. And that is going to be a challenge as we try to move into the future. Let me talk briefly about the Farm Bill. I think there's the conservation title. I think there's continuing to be a lot of discussion, not about CRP program, not the retirement system. It's going to be about working lands. That's where all the debate is going to be. That's going to be where the request from producers. That's what the sustainability efforts of the Biden administration have been focused on. Not that they've turned their back on CRP, but we're going to be arguing about working lands program and what actually works and what is really measurable and what is really going to make a difference. And so that's where we're going to be on the conservation title. Okay, I'm about to wind up, Bert. Increasingly, and I think the sustainability conversation sets it up. And I'm not picking on Walmart, other than Walmart is headquartered in Arkansas, so I thought, well, who else would I use in this example? I think there's a fascinating thing. When you start thinking about things that are going to change the way you farm, and things that are maybe going to come down that you don't really like, but you have to do them. We used to think, and people would look to Washington, D.C. and say, I don't like EPA, and I don't like this, and I don't like that. Rest assured, environmental groups do not just work in Washington, D.C. Increasingly, they are trying to convert young people, young consumers. I have 3 children of my own. One of them likes to consume a lot of very popular items and products that her age group likes, and some of them I kind of scoff at, but she doesn't listen to Dad. She listens to her age group about what she wants to eat and how she wants to eat and things like that. And the Walmarts of the world, the Krogers of the world, are listening to my daughter about what they want to buy, and the regenerative ag and those kind of things are those Gen X, Gen Next, whatever you want to call them, my children's age group, are going to drive. They're going to drive it, and that is going to, and they're going to drive how you farm in the future. I don't think there's much question about it, and so the efforts that we've heard about this morning are things that if you're old and stubborn and hard-headed like I am, you may say, well, I don't want to do that. But that's going to happen, and it's fascinating that I think that retailers and consumers are going to reach back and drive how we farm and where we farm to a great extent in the future. So with that, I'm gonna stop, and we're gonna have a panel up here, I understand. And so why don't we go ahead and get started?
Thank you very much, Keith. Really appreciate Keith bringing his experience and insight here to share with us today. We are going to invite all of the general session speakers to come to the stage. They're pulling their microphones out now, and we'll have a time here for discussion and questions from the audience and discussion among the group. We'll be going to lunch here at 12 noon, so let's use this time. If you have a question, you've been thinking about something that one of the speakers has said this morning, we'll give you this opportunity to ask that question, and we'll stimulate some discussion here with that. We also have opportunities for panelists to ask each other questions, and I think they've mentioned a lot of what each other has been saying this morning in their presentations. So let's start. Harrison and Greg, do you have anything you've heard since you spoke in the morning session that's, Harrison, you're 30 years back to the future. We're bringing some microphones in for you. What's stimulated some thoughts from your back to the future now with these other speakers?
Quite a bit, actually. Because there's enough, I'll just go in reverse chronological order.
Take it away, Harrison.
The last part about with the image of Walmart and the Capitol, I think that says a lot right there, because I think from an agriculture perspective, a huge challenge in this world of sustainability, or if we want to call it regenerative ag, whatever we're going to call it. From a production standpoint, industry standpoint, there's kind of, I won't call it a love-hate relationship. It's like a hate-love relationship with the government. Always has been, always will be. Can't really live with it, can't really live without it, in terms of the programs and et cetera. Then you have on the private sector side, like you were talking about, like a big player says, well, this is the way we're going to do it. And to put that in perspective, a huge, company, say Tyson Foods, huge. They're a vendor to Walmart. Okay, just to give an idea of scope. And I think from that perspective, production, they have to figure out how you cuddle up in this sort of hate-love relationship with the government, because they need it to help both facilitate and protect on the private sector side, particularly if you have the consolidation that I think we all feel like is inevitably going to stay in place and probably increase, to where you have those players, they move, and they say, well, we're changing our supply chain, and we're going to produce in this particular way. And kind of tying in when I talked about sort of the bullet point about the future of supply chain, the future of commerce, we're going to find out, like, this is a new world in that Prop 12 decision where states are going to challenge that. And when you have companies that they're not just national, they're multinational, and they're managing consumer interest and sentiment in Europe just as well as in the United States, and they need as much uniformity for efficiency, it's a recipe to kind of get rolled over if you're not careful. So that's where I'll just pick that one.
Yeah, well, that's good. So responses from the panel, anyone that'd like to comment on that?
Got the mic. So from a cotton perspective, I think he's spot on. So we have a group within the National Cotton Council called Cotton Council International, and their goal is to really advance the use of U.S. cotton on an international stage. And so we watch the policies coming out of the European Union very closely and have people actually stationed all throughout Europe. And increasingly, we hear that very same thing from the brands and retailers. They're concerned about their profitability and then the uniformity of their supply chains. They can't have a product made for the U.S. and another one made for the European Union and another one made for some other region in the world. So I think the times are changing, and I really hope the U.S. cotton industry changes with it.
Megan, did you have anything on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it from the sustainability perspective and the role that companies play, large companies play, is, they've actually been talking about sustainability for a long time, and a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them really at the heart, I think, are starting to understand that looking at challenges and opportunities more holistically and long term can ultimately help their business. Granted, that competes with the short-term nature of the markets, which seems to be almost working in nanoseconds lately, but they ultimately are in the business of being around longer. And so, they've also been doing a lot of the things internally, and now they're at the point where they've got to look beyond down into their supply chain. And I think, admittedly, they didn't really know how to do it. And I'm not sure they completely know how to do it now, but they're trying. And I think that when we look at agriculture, too, a lot of what we're talking about, those companies are talking about doing, is things that farmers already know. They've seen it. They've seen the impact of using a pesticide or not kind of properly. There's just a logic there, and so I think it was more around the kind of clarity of how do you marry what ultimately farmers understand is appropriate to make their farm more productive with what they're being asked to do, which seems to be in kind of a different arena. But at the end of the day, I think they're rather similar, but we haven't quite learned how to speak the same language.
Okay, thank you. I think Keith has something.
Well, just following up, in one way or another, this is going to lead to a lot more record keeping. That we're going to find a way to automate it. But an example was given to me. It was cotton several years ago. Okay, you're going to raise cotton in the United States. It's going to go to Asia to be processed, and then it's going to come back. Well, it's really easy to tag a bale of cotton. But as it goes through the manufacturing process, how do you keep track of that cotton and its attributes through the system? And it's not surprising that we see some of these things in short, simple supply chains like vegetables, green leafy vegetables and things like that, versus more complicated things. We've got some research going on at Mississippi State about how do you verify where a piece of wood was grown, in terms of international protocols coming out of the Amazon rainforest and things like that. And, so it's down to a 2x4 that we're going to have to identify going forward.
Okay. Well, thank you. Are there questions from the audience? I visited with some people during the break. Does anyone have anything now? Yes, here, Andrew Grobmeyer. So the question has to do with the current farm protest movements in Western Europe, and does that have any implications for agricultural policy in the United States? Harrison or Keith, want to lead off on that?
Harrison, you go first.
I would say you get some free time today, Google Wayne Kreitz and read about the man that, he stuck it back, and he did get the law changed, got in a lot of trouble for it. But we don't have the same, historically, the same culture there. But in the tractor cage of the 80s, I think it'd take a whole lot for us to get to that point here. But it's in, their history is very different. And they're, everything about it is quite different. And so they're, just as we're talking about operating a global system, they are too. And they've come out of like things like that we would consider to like literally be foreign. Geographic indicators, geographic indications, a different trademark system, different intellectual property system. And so they're looking at a world that is kind of, like, we call it baloney. They say, you're not even supposed to use that name. That's supposed to belong to us, that kind of thing. So that's part of my thoughts there, Andrew.
Follow up, Keith, or Chad? Chad?
Well, so I've got actually have a conference call first thing tomorrow morning about exactly that, reversal in some cases about those policies. But one thing we don't want to need to lose sight of is that agriculture is not immune to a free market. And so you even though the policies may be changing in the EU, it may be the consumers and then ultimately shareholders of these multinational companies that drive the change. I've seen it firsthand for myself how activist shareholders can cause mergers and acquisitions, and so they can certainly drive the sustainability programs inside their own companies.
When you asked that question, one of the things I thought about, because I have a fraternity brother from the University of Missouri that drove his tractor to Washington, D.C. in the 1980s. That was brought on by a financial crisis. And the thing that surprises me today, I've loved this conversation, but you know what we haven't talked about very much is interest rates. Mm-hmm. And the farm crisis of the 1980s was, it was so painful. And it was driven by macro policy. I think I and a lot of other economists have been fairly shocked at how well, and I will say the Fed has managed the economy, and rates went up, and maybe they're going to go down now, we hope. But if we can achieve the soft landing that they're trying to achieve, that will help us a lot. But, Greg, you've been around long enough. You remember those high interest rates of the 80s and what a terrible time that was. And I was afraid we were headed in that direction, but I'm somewhat more hopeful now than I was 2 years ago. I wonder if you would comment about that scenario.
Okay, so the question for Greg is, how do current macroeconomic conditions bear on the future of agriculture? Near term, I guess.
Well, it's no doubt. It's a whole lot different in the 80s when I started. The fundamentals are a lot different. And of course, no doubt, early 80s, we had a 21% prime rate. I mean, you think about that. Here's where we're at with interest rates. We call it the high for longer. We're high. No, we're norm. If you look at the history of prime, it's probably about 6.25, 6.5. So what we just went through the last, 12 of the 15 years was abnormally. It was quoted, let's say one of the farm magazines a few years ago, that a farm mortgage was the same price it was in 1955. So I've benefited my last several years, all this in ag lending, about selling a product that was as cheap as that. Mm-hmm. The challenge we run into, a lot of farmers set their budgets, as well as consumers, on these ultra-low interest rates, not the norm. So as I talked about today, the consolidation, The ones growing the most are the ones accumulating the most debt, more leverage. So they're more sensitive. So right now, yeah, we're having stress or very thin margins because these, what I call normal interest rates, was not what they set their debt structures on. But now, I get this question all the time, Greg, are we going back to the 80s? No, I can speak a lot about the difference then, now, with foreign policy. And the other thing, the one that influences who owes the most money is the government. Our debt to GDP is the highest since the end of World War II. So, for what was it, I forget, every 100 basis points increase in interest rate. I heard one of the congressmen when I was in D.C. I mean, that's equivalent to the whole farm bill. I mean, farm. So the point is, I think we have plateaued the Fed. The question is when, what will they do? Well, I was in D.C. with National Farm Credit last week, heard a lot of speakers. There's a lot of camps there. Some said, obviously, there's going to be political influence with the election. The Dems would want it to go down. But if you follow the economics, it's more likely, no doubt we're plateaued. We could see a reduction this year. But here's the story we want to say to producers. Don't set your budgets on, a 3% rate. I mean, that's not. You need to have it on more the norm.
Okay, well, thank you, Greg. Ted, did you have a question? So Ted Glob's question has to do with, is there distortions of the real estate and production agriculture markets by recreational use of farmland and the increasing regulatory burden may be associated with environmental restrictions?
Well, Ted, here, obviously, in eastern Arkansas, duck hunting is huge. And yeah, I mean, I look at the leases we see and how they influence. I saw one of the days, $400,000. I mean, from a duck pit of a 10,000. So obviously recreational land, you appraise like our appraisers, that has a lot of influence. Now there's a lot of factors. Think about if we go to a shorter duck season, we got a negative trend. You've got those factors there. Yeah, I don't know, as far as regulation, I don't know what that, there's lots of enhancements with, conservation. There's a lot of money. There's so many programs a farmer or landowner can get, like flooding your fields and subsidies and levee work and stuff like that. There's a lot of that. But no doubt in this area, recreational influence is a lot. And I would think, of course, I'm a duck hunter, and I look at trends of everything. And you would think that demand would go down, but it doesn't. It's just a fact that it's the fad. People want to spend money. It's called a piece of rural America. I call it the Yellowstone effect. People want to get out in nature, so they want land, they want a clubhouse, they want to get away from things. Well, that drives demand and revenue, which capitalizes into the land.
Does that answer it, Ted? I thought you might have a follow-up.
My good friend Harrison can handle that one. He has ATC scores.
How to not make a mud hole an obstacle? Is that what I'm hearing? I think it's harder than ever. It got a little easier with, from a legal perspective, a little bit easier with the Sackett decision, with what is a wetland under the waters of the United States. But that doesn't remove you from conservation compliance, and that doesn't remove potential application of the Endangered Species Act. And in this part of the country, I was over in western Mississippi just fairly recent, last few months, and it was part of the Endangered Species Act, EPA, all the pesticide mitigation stuff, and there was a working group there, and we went into one of these mud holes, and they had pondberry. They were showing it was an endangered species. It looks like something you would just like clip in your yard, and that doesn't look very, looks like a little holly bush or something. And while we were standing there, someone said, well, is this a wetland? And then someone in the group said, well, not anymore, because the Sackett decision that just came out. You can do whatever you want with that. And I said, well, like the fact that we're here, this is an endangered species here. You're not able to do whatever you want with it right here. And plus, you'd have conservation compliance, swamp buster, sod buster. So, I don't know, maybe in 30 years, I'll ask you what you did with that hole. And we'll find out. You might still be in litigation for it.
Something. Okay, Greg has something else as we're starting to wrap up our session.
Yeah, I got one for my good friend Harrison. You know, I've been fortunate over the last few years to travel throughout the United States, all the major ag growing areas. I showed the map. This time last year, as I was out in California, I've done the West, all the West, and toured the Central Valley of California. So I'm always looking at what are pain points potentially. I always said, if I'm gonna be here 20 years, what's the pain points? Obviously out there, water. You know, the big sign in Bakersfield where water flow, food grows. And I just talked about how unique and the Delta is, and here we got water. But what do you see, you and I talk, you got a program out there in Western like you do in Memphis now. What do you see for us far as environmental or policies, regulations in terms of water? I know we got these hot spots. Wiener, my wife Stuttgart, has a farm in Stuttgart. We got hot spots there for groundwater doing all this. But when I look at pain points, my question is, what could happen in this region of the country from more regulatorial in terms of water?
Okay. I'd probably put that in two categories. One that will trend out in the years ahead will be application of the Endangered Species Act. And so I think we can that's as far as we really need to go on that today. But you know, increasing human population, you got plants and critters and stuff that some of us couldn't pronounce the names, but I think that'll be a factor. And then I would, you know, maybe I'm twisting your question slightly. My knee-jerk reaction is to look at it more in terms of opportunity, that maybe in this region of the country, we actually have a stitch in time by being able to, look at what they did and didn't do. You know, and like think of things like the Grand Prairie Irrigation Project, things that are just like long-term. It take a long time to get the funding together. It takes the infrastructure, then keep the political support. And so an idea that, you know, you may have it today in like water conservation, think, well, we should do this yesterday. Well, if you start today and work really hard, you probably have it in 20 years or 25. And so along with that, I'd say we actually have some advantages in terms of groundwater, in terms of surface water, that if we engage with some foresight, we can take the lessons learned from there. Not that there aren't going to be regulatory challenges, but I actually think, I look at it more in a maybe optimistic way. And their challenges out there are to our benefit. You know, there are companies that it's difficult for them to survive economically if water is as expensive as it is in the regulatory atmosphere. You know, and it's not always just purely ag production. Think of a company like Envirotech set up in the port in Helena, Arkansas. That came from Modesto, California, and supply parasitic acids up to the poultry industry. That's a imagine, like as the first business in all those decades to go into the port, they just landed out, and that was their issue. Their challenge was our opportunity. I think you could do that numerous times.
Okay, well, panel, you've done a great job. Let's give them a hand, please. Well, I'm very pleased with the way the morning session worked out this year for our 30th anniversary. We had a lot of good content, a lot of food for thought. We will have some food for the body here at lunch. We have, for the first time, our luncheon will be held in the Embassy Suites Red Wolf Convention Center. Change of location this year. Please break your habits of walking to the arena. So we will enter the back door, which is the west side of the Embassy Suites Hotel. There are buffet lines there. 2 of them go further back as it fills up. If you're first, move further back and go through the lines, then go into the ballroom, take your seat at the round tables there in the ballroom, and we'll begin our luncheon program from there. All of the afternoon sessions this year are also in the Embassy Suites Red Wolf Convention Center, new locations there. So thank you very much, panel. We're adjourned. I'll see you in the Embassy Suites ballroom.